Welcome back to Harry's Cosmos, where the what-ifs come alive. Today's story, what if Hermione remembered the entire war and saved Harry from the start? Before we dive in, do me a favor, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so a single adventure never slips past you. Comfortable? Good, let's begin. Chapter 1, The Girl Who Woke Up Knowing the Ceiling Was Wrong. That was the first thing Hermione understood, before her name, before the date, before the impossible arithmetic of her own hands. The ceiling above her was the ceiling of her childhood bedroom in Hampstead, papered in a print of small blue cornflowers that her mother had chosen when Hermione was 6, and had promised to change when Hermione was old enough to have opinions about wallpaper. The crack in the corner ran the same way it had always run, a thin gray river forking toward the light fixture. She had not seen that crack in a very long time. She had assumed, somewhere in the part of her mind that kept ledgers, that the house had been sold, that the wallpaper had been stripped, that strangers slept beneath that crack now and called it theirs. She had assumed a great many things about the future. The trouble was that she remembered the future, and the future did not contain the ceiling. She lay still. She had learned, late and at a terrible price, that the first thing to do when reality contradicted itself was to refuse to move until you understood why. Movement was commitment. Movement told the world you had accepted its terms. So she lay flat under the duvet with the cornflowers above her and the morning light coming gray through the curtains, and she catalogued. Item, she was small. Her body was light against the mattress in the particular way that a child's body is light. All the heaviness she'd carried for years simply gone, the ache in her shoulder gone, the older ache lower in her ribs that had never properly healed also gone. Item, her hands. She lifted one off the duvet and turned it in the gray light, unscarred. The thin white line that should have run across the back of it, the one she had earned in a forest she did not want to think about yet, was not there. The skin was soft and unmarked and very young. Item, the smell of the house toast and her father's coffee and the lemon polish her mother used on the banister. A smell she'd forgotten until it arrived all at once and undid something in her chest. She did the arithmetic anyway because she could not stop herself. If the wallpaper was the wallpaper and the hands were these hands and the toast was downstairs, then it was summer and she was 11 and Hogwarts had not happened yet. None of it had happened yet. The thought was too large to hold, so she held a smaller one instead. She turned her head on the pillow and looked at the calendar pinned to the corkboard above her desk, the one with the kittens, July, to a child who liked dates and liked order. The little box marked with the first day of the month had a red ring drawn around it. Beneath the kittens, in her own careful 11-year-old handwriting, a date, the 4th of July, 1991. She knew this date as you know the edge of a cliff in the dark. 3 days from now her letter would come, the heavy parchment with the green ink, and her parents would laugh and then stop laughing. 27 days from now a half-giant would knock down the door of a hut on a rock in the sea and tell a boy that he was a wizard. Hermione Granger, lying very still in a bed in Hampstead, knew his name and knew the shape of his life and knew how it ended, and the knowing went through her like cold water poured straight into the marrow. She got the duvet to her mouth before the first sound came out, and she bit down on it, and she did not let the house hear her. Grief is not, in Hermione's experience, a wave. People said it was a wave because waves were tidy. They arrived, they crested, they withdrew, and you could stand on the beach afterward and dry off. Grief was not a wave, grief was weather. It was the climate you now lived in, and it did not withdraw, and you did not dry off. You only learned which days the storms came and built your roof accordingly. She had built a great many roofs. She had been very good at it at the end. She had been the one who organized the funerals when there were bodies and the memorials when there were not. She had read the names aloud at the first anniversary because her voice did not shake, and people had thanked her for the steadiness, and not one of them had understood that the steadiness was the worst symptom of all, that a person whose voice does not shake at a list of the dead has already paid for that calm in a currency she will never get back. So when the storm came up through the duvet that morning, she let it come, because fighting it cost more than weathering it, and she counted as she had taught herself to count not sheep but facts. Fact, she was awake. Fact, she had gone to sleep, the last time she could be sure of going to sleep, as a grown woman in a world that had been won and was not saved, in a flat that was too quiet because the person who should have filled it with noise had stopped being able to fill anything with anything. Fact, the last thing she had seen, the genuinely last thing before the gray, had been a face. She did not let herself see the face yet. She was not strong enough for the face yet. She put it in the locked drawer with the rest and turned the key and counted on. Fact, this was either real or it was not. If it was not real, then it was a dream or a delusion or some final firing of a mind shutting down, and in that case nothing she did mattered and she lost nothing by treating it as real. If it was real, then it mattered enormously, and treating it as false would be the single most unforgivable thing she had ever done. The logic was not complicated. The logic, in fact, was the easiest thing in the world, which was why she trusted it more than she trusted the storm. There was only one rational policy under uncertainty, and the policy was this. She had been handed the one thing she would have sold her soul for, and she was going to take it. The door was real. She would walk through it and find out on the other side. She uncurled. She put her bare feet on the floor of her childhood bedroom, and the floor was cold and solid, and exactly as cold and solid as a real floor is, and she stood up in a body that did not hurt anywhere, and she went to the mirror over her chest of drawers and looked. A girl looked back. Brown eyes too large for the face, brown hair too large for everything, front teeth she had been self-conscious about and would later fix and would much later stop caring about because there were larger things to be conscious of than teeth. 11 years old, no lines at the eyes. No gray at the temple, which was absurd to think about. She did gray at 30. Everyone in that war had gone gray early or gone into the ground. She put her hand flat on the cool glass. The reflection put its hand up to meet hers. "All right," she said very quietly to the girl in the mirror who was herself, who was the start of everything. "All right, we do it properly this time." Downstairs her mother was scrambling eggs and the radio was on, a presenter reading the cricket scores in the voice the BBC reserved for cricket scores, and her father was reading something with the particular rustle of a man who reads the whole newspaper, including the parts he disapproves of. Hermione stopped on the bottom step out of sight with one hand on the banister that smelled of lemon, and she made herself breathe. They were alive, of course they were alive. They were 39 and 41 and healthy and in their own kitchen on a Thursday morning, and they did not know yet that in a handful of years their daughter would stand in this kitchen and lift the memory of herself out of their heads with her own wand, and send them to the other side of the world under names that were not their names, to keep them breathing while the world she dragged them to the edge of came apart. They did not know any of that. They were arguing pleasantly about whether the dentist's surgery needed a new sign. She had thought she was prepared. She had spent the count upstairs thinking she was prepared, and then she came around the corner into the kitchen, and her mother turned with the pan in her hand and said, "There she is, late riser, the eggs are nearly cement," and Hermione's whole tactical apparatus, the ledgers and the policies and the locked drawers, fell over like a shelf of books in an earthquake, and she crossed the kitchen and put her arms around her mother's waist and held on. "Goodness," her mother said, surprised, the pan held out to the side so she didn't burn anyone. "What's brought this on?" "Nothing," Hermione said into her mother's cardigan, which smelled of the lemon polish, and underneath it of her mother, a smell with no name and no substitute. "I had a horrible dream." "Ah," said her father from behind the paper in the tone of a man who considered dreams a soft science. "Was it the one where the algebra has no solution? I have that one. Terrifying, Dad." "Sit down, both of you," her mother said. "Eggs, Hermione, you look pale. Are you sick?" "I'm fine," Hermione said, and sat and accepted the eggs and ate them. And they were the best things she had ever eaten because they were ordinary, because nobody at this table was going to die today, because the radio was reading cricket scores in a world where the cricket scores were the most dangerous thing on the air. She ate her eggs and watched her parents be alive and let the storm pass over without showing on her face, and she thought, with the cold, clean part of her mind that had survived everything, "I have time. This is the one thing I was never given and have now been given. I have time, and I am the only person on this island who knows what is coming, and I will not waste a single hour of it." It was the closest thing to prayer she had. She wasn't a praying sort. She made it to the eggs. She spent the morning being 11, which was harder than any spell she had ever cast. It required a specific and exhausting performance. An 11-year-old does not know how to fold a fitted sheet with crisp competence. She had to deliberately make a hash of it when her mother asked her to help with the laundry. An 11-year-old does not glance at the kitchen knives and assess them, does not map the exits of a room on entering it, does not flinch when a car backfires in the street and then, having flinched, smooth her own face over before anyone notices. Hermione did all of these things and corrected all of them, and the correcting was its own labor, a constant low tax on a mind already carrying everything else. But she used the morning. She was not a person who failed to use a morning. She went up to her room after lunch with a school exercise book and a biro, the cover printed with a smiling cartoon owl that she would, in about 3 weeks, find significantly less funny, and she sat on the floor with her back against the bed, and she opened the book to the first blank page, and she began to write. She did not write a diary. She had opinions about diaries that had been formed by very bad experiences and would be formed again by worse ones, and in any case a diary was a thing for feelings, and she did not need a record of her feelings, she needed a record of the war. She wrote at the top of the page in small, neat capitals, "What I know." Then she wrote it all down. She wrote the names of the dead, which was the part that took longest, not because there were so many, though there were, but because she made herself write each one in full, first name and last, as you read them at a memorial, because a name written in full is a person and a name abbreviated is a casualty, and she had decided long ago that she would not let them become casualties on her page. She wrote them in the order they had fallen because the order was a map. The order told you when Voldemort moved and how, told you the rhythm of the thing, the slow squeeze and then the sudden grip. Cedric first, then a gap, a year of quiet that was not quiet, then Sirius through an archway laughing in the wrong direction, then Dumbledore on a tower by a wand he himself had arranged to be raised. Then the long red year and the names came faster than her hand could move, and she wrote them anyway. Mad-Eye and Hedwig and Ted Tonks and Dobby with the silver letter opener in his small, brave chest, and Fred with the laugh still on his face, and Remus and Nymphadora lying a little apart when they should not have been apart at all, and Colin who was too young and had snuck back in, and Snape on the floor of a boathouse giving up his memories like a man emptying his pockets before a long journey. And then she stopped because the next name was the face in the locked drawer, and she was not going to write that one. She did not need to write that one. She would never, as long as her mind held together, be in any danger of forgetting it. She drew a line under the list. Beneath the line she changed the heading. She wrote, "What they will do." And here her hand steadied because this was strategy, and strategy did not make her cry. She wrote out the moves as you write out a chess problem you have already solved. White to play and mate in 100 horrible moves. She wrote what Quirrell was and what was riding on the back of his skull under the turban. She wrote where the stone was and how the trapdoor worked and what waited beneath it. She wrote the diary and the chamber and the basilisk and the way a little girl with red hair would pour herself into a book until the book had almost finished pouring her out. She wrote the names of the things Voldemort had torn his soul into and where each one sat in the world this very morning, the ring in the ruined shack with the curse already coiled inside it, the locket in the dark of a house in London with a heartbroken house elf guarding it, the cup behind goblin steel, the diadem in the room that became whatever you needed and had been, for 50 years, a place to hide a crown. She wrote the worst one last and underlined it twice because the worst one was a child, and he did not know, and almost nobody knew, and the people who knew had decided that he was a thing to be spent. She wrote, beside that line, 3 words, and the biro pressed so hard it nearly went through the page. Not this time. She put the exercise book in the gap behind the headboard, where her 11-year-old self had kept things she did not want her mother to dust, and she sat back against the bed and made herself think clearly about the one thing that mattered more than all the rest of it put together. The stone, the diary, the horcruxes, the long arithmetic of the war. She could solve all of it, given time and care and the enormous unfair advantage of having seen the answer key. But solving the war was the second problem. The first problem was a boy in a cupboard, and the first problem had a deadline, and the deadline was the engine of everything. Because here was the thing she understood now that she had not understood at 11 the first time, the thing it had taken her the whole war and the loss at the end of it to understand. Harry had not been saved. Harry had been managed. He had been left in that house with those people not by accident but by design, by a kind old man with a long plan, kept hungry and unwanted and alone so that when kindness finally arrived in the shape of a giant in a cake, it would land like a religion. A starving child will follow anyone who feeds him. A child who has never been chosen will die for the first person who chooses him and will call it love and will be right to call it love and will be used by it all the same. She was not going to let kindness arrive on schedule. She was not going to let it arrive wearing Dumbledore's stagecraft. She was going to get there first. She was going to be the first person in Harry Potter's life to choose him for no reason at all except that he was worth choosing before the letter, before the giant, before the machine, so that when the machine finally reached for him there was already someone standing in the way. It was the highest leverage move on the board. It was also, and she let herself notice this without flinching, the only move she actually wanted to make. The strategist and the girl who had held a dying face both pointed at the same square. That almost never happened. When it did, you moved. The difficulty was geography, and the difficulty was being 11. Harry was in Surrey. Little Winging, Surrey, number 4 Privet Drive, a name and a street she could have recited in her sleep and frequently had. Hampstead to Little Winging was an hour and a bit by car, less than an hour by train and bus, a distance that was nothing to an adult with a wand and a great deal to a child with no money and parents who would, very reasonably, want to know why their daughter needed to visit a stranger's house in a town she had no reason to know existed. She turned the problem over. She was good at problems. The trick with parents, she had relearned that morning over the eggs, was not to lie to them because they were not stupid and lies left edges. The trick was to give them a true thing shaped so that they wanted to help. She thought about the letter. The letter would come on the 7th. She was nearly certain of the date, the heavy envelope and the green ink and the address that knew which bedroom she slept in. Her parents would not believe it. They would think it a prank, an elaborate one, and her father would make jokes about it for exactly as long as it took for something to float, and then the jokes would stop. There would be a window, a strange bright window of a few days, when her parents were off balance and credulous and frightened and looking to her, their clever daughter, to tell them what any of it meant. People who are off balance say yes to things they would otherwise say no to. People who are frightened want to do something, anything, to feel they have a hand on the wheel. She did not love the plan. The plan used her parents' fear, and she had spent enough of her life using people's fear, including theirs, including at the end when she'd used a memory charm on the 2 people who loved her most in the world for their own good, which is the sentence every monster says. But the plan also told them the truth, which was that their daughter had been invited into a world they could not follow her into, and that there was another child being invited into it alone with no one, and that Hermione wanted to find him before he was alone for one day longer than he had to be. That part was not strategy. That part she would have said even if it cost her instead of helped her. She heard her mother on the stairs. She slid the exercise book deeper into the dark behind the headboard and arranged her face into the face of a girl who had been reading, and she picked up the nearest book without looking at the title. "There you are," her mother said, leaning in the doorway. "You've been very quiet, that's usually you plotting something." She said it fondly. She did not know how right she was, and Hermione loved her so much in that moment that the love was indistinguishable from the storm. "Reading," Hermione said, and held up the book, which turned out to be a guide to British garden birds, which was not what she would have chosen. Her mother's eyebrows went up. "Birds, new phase. I like to know things," Hermione said, which was the truest thing she'd said all day. When her mother had gone, Hermione lay back on the carpet and looked at the cornflowers and let herself, for exactly 1 minute by the clock on her desk, plan the days. 3 days until the letter, then the strange window. Then Surrey before the 31st, no matter what. She would need money for a journey if the family one fell through. There was a tin of holiday savings in the kitchen, and she would replace whatever she borrowed. She would need a story that did not break under a second question. She would need, above all, to remember how to be a child to the adults around her while being something else entirely underneath, and she had 11 years of practice at the first part and a war's worth of practice at the second. The minute ended, she got up. She went and helped her mother with the laundry and folded the fitted sheet badly on purpose and waited. The letter came on the 7th in the second post, which her father collected because he had taken the morning off to do something with the surgery's accounts and was glad of an excuse not to. She heard him laugh in the hall. "Jean," he called. "Jean, come and look at this. Somebody's gone to a great deal of trouble." It's addressed to Hermione, to her bedroom. "Look," it says, "the second bedroom, the smaller one, cheeky." He came into the kitchen, turning the envelope over in his hands, a tall man with a dentist's careful fingers, holding the thick yellowish parchment and the wax seal stamped with a crest, an eagle, a lion, a badger, a serpent. "It's rather good, actually. Feels like real parchment. Hermione, have your school friends started a club?" "Is this a club?" "Open it," Hermione said. She had thought she was beyond being moved by it. She had read this letter, the words of it, 100 times in her head over the years, had quoted it in arguments and recited it in nightmares. She was wrong. When her father slit the envelope with the butter knife, frowning now, and unfolded the heavy sheets and read the first line aloud in a voice that began as a joke and stopped being one by the third word, she found that her eyes had gone hot, and she had to look down at her cereal and breathe. "We are pleased to inform you," her father read, "that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of." He stopped. He read the next word silently. He looked up. "This is a strange joke," he said, but the joke had left his voice entirely because he was a clever man married to a clever woman and they had raised a clever child, and clever people can feel the floor change under a joke before they can explain why. "Witchcraft and wizardry," her mother had come to read over his shoulder. "Term begins on the 1st of September," she read. "We await your owl by no later than the 31st of July. She straightened. "Owl," she said, in the flat voice of a woman who has decided to be reasonable about something unreasonable. "We await your owl." This was the window. Hermione had thought about how to use it for 3 days, and now that it was open she found she did not want to use it like a tool. She found she wanted, very badly, for them to believe her because she could not do the next part alone, and because they were going to lose her by inches over the coming years to a world they could never enter, and this was the last summer they would have her wholly, and she did not want to spend it lying. So she did the other thing. She had not been certain she could. Magic had answered her as a child the first time without her asking, as it answers frightened or wanting children, and she had spent the years since making it answer on command, and the question was whether the command still lived in these untrained 11-year-old hands, or whether she had woken up with a head full of spells and no way to cast them. She looked at the salt cellar in the middle of the table. She knew the shape of the wand. That was the whole secret of it, that the books took 300 pages to not quite say. You did not push, you wanted precisely, with the whole instrument of your attention. She wanted the salt cellar to rise. It rose. It lifted off the tablecloth, turning slowly, scattering a few grains that ticked back down onto the cloth like the smallest possible rain, and it hung at the height of the milk jug while her mother's hand found her father's arm and gripped it, and her father stopped breathing in any regular way, and then Hermione let it down gently because a dropped salt cellar would have undone the dignity of the thing, and it touched the cloth and was only a salt cellar again. The kitchen was very quiet. The radio, mercifully, had finished with the cricket. "I can do that," Hermione said into the quiet, which was the truest and strangest sentence of her life so far. "I've been able to do small things for a while. I didn't know what it was. Now I do. It's real. The letter's real. There's a whole world, and I'm being asked into it, and I wanted you to see it from me before you read it from a stranger." Her father sat down. He did it like a man whose knees had made the decision before the rest of him caught up. He looked at the salt cellar and then at his daughter, and something moved across his face that was not fear, exactly, though fear was in it. It was the look of a man recalibrating the size of the universe and the size of his own child within it and finding both larger than he had been told. "Well," he said at last, and his voice came out cracked and then steadied. "Well, that rather changes the breakfast conversation." Her mother laughed, one sharp note that had tears at the bottom of it, and sat down too, and reached across the table and took Hermione's hand in both of hers, and turned it over and looked at the soft, unscarred palm as though magic might be written there in lines she had failed to read for 11 years. "My clever girl," she said. "My clever, clever girl. Of course it's you. Of course it would be you." It was nearly more than Hermione could hold. She had said goodbye to these two people once already, had stood in a kitchen not unlike this one, and lifted herself out of their memories, and watched the recognition go out of their eyes like a lamp, and she had done it gently, and it had been the cruelest thing she ever did. To sit here and be known by them to be my clever girl in her mother's mouth was a gift so enormous that for a moment the strategist went silent, and there was only the daughter, holding her mother's hand on a Sunday morning, with the impossible parchment between them and the salt scattered like rain. She let herself have the moment. Then she put it carefully away in a drawer that was not the locked one, a drawer she could open again, and she got to work, because the moment did not change the deadline and nothing ever would. She let them ask their questions through the morning. She answered the ones an 11-year-old plausibly could and pleaded ignorance on the rest, and her ignorance was its own kind of truth, because an 11-year-old who has merely woken up knowing the future cannot also produce a working theory of Wandlore on demand. She told them a professor would come to explain properly. She told them there would be a place in London where the things on the list were sold, a hidden place, and that they would all go together and it would be the strangest and best afternoon of their lives. She watched her father begin slowly to be delighted rather than afraid, because he was a man who had always wanted the world to be bigger than the dental surgery, and her mother begin to be practical, because practicality was how her mother loved. In the early afternoon, when the questions had thinned and her parents were sitting close together on the sofa rereading the letter for the 5th time and murmuring, Hermione sat on the arm of the chair across from them, and said the thing she had come downstairs 3 days ago intending to find a way to say. "There's something I need to do before September," she said, "and I need your help, and I can't explain all of how I know it, so I'm going to ask you to trust me the way you want me to trust you." Her father lowered the letter. "That's a very grown-up sentence," he said carefully. "There's a boy," Hermione said. "He's my age, he's going to the same school, he got the same letter, or he will very soon." She kept her voice level and let the levelness do the work. She had learned that the calmest sentence in a room is the one people lean toward. "He hasn't got anyone. He lives with relations who don't want him in Surrey, and nobody's ever told him there's a world that does want him. And in a few weeks someone is going to come and tell him all at once that he's special and famous and alone, and he's going to believe the first person who's kind to him because no one has ever been kind to him before. And I don't want that person to be a stranger with a plan. I want it to be a friend." She watched it land. Her mother's hand had found her father's again. "How do you know all this?" her father said, not unkindly. It was the second question, the one her covers were supposed to survive. She had decided not to give it a cover. "The same way I knew about the salt cellar," she said. "I just know, things come to me about that world. I can't prove it and I won't try, and I know how that sounds, and I'm telling you the truth anyway because you're the two people I will never lie to if I can help it." She held his eyes. "His name is Harry. He's in a town called Little Winging. I know the street. I want us to drive there before the end of the month, and I want to knock on the door, and I want to be the first friend he ever had. That's all. That's the whole of it." There was a long quiet. Outside, a lawnmower started somewhere down the road, the most ordinary sound in England. "Little Winging," her mother said slowly. "That's, Hermione, that's an hour away. We don't know these people. You want to turn up on a stranger's doorstep and announce yourself to a child we've never met." "Yes," said Hermione, "because you just know he needs a friend." "Yes." Her mother looked at her for a long time, and Hermione let herself be looked at, let her mother search her face for the seam where the story came apart, and there was no seam, because under the impossible delivery, the thing she was asking for was the most human thing in the world. Her mother had spent 11 years watching her daughter give her sandwiches away to children who'd forgotten their lunch, watching her sit with the ones nobody sat with, watching her catalog the loneliness of a playground and quietly set about fixing it one overlooked child at a time. This was not out of character. This was the most in-character thing Hermione had ever asked for. That was the genius of telling the truth. It fit. "Richard," her mother said at last, not taking her eyes off Hermione. "What do you think?" Her father set the letter down on the cushion beside him, very carefully, as if it might lift off on its own. "I think," he said, "that our daughter made a salt cellar fly this morning, and I think I have spent the last 40 years being quietly certain that the universe was smaller and meaner than I hoped, and I think I have just been proven wrong, and I am not inclined, on the same day, to start telling her that her instincts about a lonely child are nonsense." He looked at Hermione, and there was the steel in him that she had inherited and would need. "But we do it properly. We don't ambush a family. We go, the three of us, in daylight, and you have your knock at the door, and if his people slam it in our faces, we come home and you write him a letter instead. Those are the terms." "Those are good terms," Hermione said, and meant it because they were better than her own plan and because her father had just, without knowing it, agreed to drive her straight at the single most important square on the board. "When," her mother said. Hermione looked at the calendar through the doorway, the kittens, the red ring around a date that no longer frightened her because she was going to get there first. "Soon," she said, "before the end of the month. There's a clock on it I can't explain, and I need you to believe me that the clock is real, and that every day we wait is a day he spends thinking no one is coming." Her mother stood and crossed the room and put her hand on the top of Hermione's wild hair, a gesture left over from when Hermione was very small, and Hermione closed her eyes under the weight of it. "Then we'll go soon," her mother said. "My clever girl, we'll go and find your Harry." "Your Harry," her mother said, as a parent says it of a stray a child has decided to name, not knowing that she had named the truest thing in 2 lifetimes, not knowing that her daughter had crossed back over the whole ruin of a war to put her hand on a particular door before anyone else could, not knowing anything at all except that her daughter's face had gone still and shining and certain. The trip was set for the 23rd, a Tuesday, because her father had a clear afternoon, and her mother liked the idea of a proper outing rather than a smash and grab, and Hermione discovered that the hardest part of having a plan was the days you spent not yet executing it. She used them. She always used them. She read everything in the house that touched on Surrey, the road atlas in the hall cupboard most of all, tracing the A-roads down through the gray commuter towns until her finger found the cluster of streets that meant little winging, identical closes and crescents drawn so close they bled into one another, a place designed by people who wanted nothing to ever happen in it. Number 4 would be near the end of a street of houses that were the same house printed 8 times. She knew the look of it before she saw it. She had stood in its kitchen once in a life that had not happened yet and watched the child she was going to save be told to make the breakfast. She thought, in those waiting days, mostly about what not to do. That was the discipline of it. A lesser planner handed her advantages, would have rehearsed a speech, would have arrived on the doorstep and tried to download a war into a starving child in a single afternoon, and would have failed because nobody believes a stranger who knows too much, and a child who has learned that adults lie and adults leave does not make an exception for the 11-year-old who appears at his gate quoting prophecy. She was not going to do that. She was going to do something far more difficult and far slower. She was going to be ordinary. She was going to be a girl his own age who liked him plainly for no purpose, who came back, who kept coming back, who let trust build at the speed trust actually builds, which is the speed of a tree and not a firework. The future could wait in the locked drawer. What he needed first was not a general. What he needed first was a friend, and she had the rarest qualification in the world for the post, which was that she already loved him and was prepared to spend years proving it before she ever once asked him to believe the impossible. She practiced being 11 in the garden. She lay on the grass that smelled of cut green and warm earth and watched the clouds and made herself want nothing for whole minutes at a time, which turned out to be the most advanced magic she attempted all month. She mostly failed at it. The clock was always there under everything, ticking toward a hut on a rock in the sea. On the night of the 22nd, she laid her clothes out on the chair, folded for an early start, and she sat on the edge of her bed with the cornflowers gray in the dark above her, and she let herself just once take the face out of the locked drawer and look at it, younger than she had last seen it. Whole, unmarked, like her own hands now, not lost yet. Not lost at all if she was quick and clever and brave and very, very careful. She put the face away again and lay down and did not sleep much, and that was all right. She had not come back for sleep. Right there behind the headboard in an exercise book with a cartoon owl on the cover, 3 words sat underlined twice in biro pressed nearly through the page. Hermione did not need to look at them. She had been carrying them since the moment she opened her eyes under the wrong sailing, and she would carry them out the door and into Surrey and into everything that came after, a stone she had chosen gladly to carry. Soon, before the end of the month, before the giant, before the cake, before the machine, she was going to be first. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, the door she crossed a war to reach Privet Drive was worse than she remembered because she remembered it as a set of facts, and now she had to look at it. Her father turned the car off Magnolia Crescent at 2:30 on the 23rd of July, and they came into a street of houses that had all agreed, at some committee meeting before any of them were born, to be identical. The same square of lawn mown to the same length, the same net curtains, the same hanging baskets dripping the same lobelia. It was a street that had decided nothing would ever be allowed to happen on it, and had enforced the decision so thoroughly that the air itself seemed to have been ironed. Hermione sat in the back with the road atlas closed on her knees and looked at it and understood, in a way the ledger upstairs could never have made her understand, why a boy raised here had walked into a forest without arguing. You could not learn to fight in a place like this. You could only learn to disappear. Number 4, her father said, slowing. There, the one being smug about its begonias. It was the house. She had stood in its kitchen once, in a memory that belonged to a war that had not happened. From the outside it was nothing, a brick box keeping its secrets behind double glazing, and the worst of its secrets was that there were no secrets, that the cruelty inside it was so ordinary it didn't even bother to hide. Don't park outside, Hermione said. Round the corner by the little park. Her mother turned in her seat. You've gone very quiet, love. We don't have to do this. We can turn round and have an ice cream and go home, and you can write your letter instead, like Dad said. I want to do it, Hermione said, and the wanting was the truest thing in the car. I just want to do it right. Her father pulled in along the railing of a scrubby municipal play park, a rectangle of grass with a roundabout, a battered slide, and a row of swings, 2 of which had been wound up over their bars by older children so that they hung out of reach of anyone small. He switched off the engine. In the sudden quiet, a wood pigeon was saying the same 5 notes over and over from a telegraph pole, the only thing in little winging willing to repeat itself out loud. Here's what I think, Hermione said, and laid it out as she laid everything out, because a plan said aloud was a plan you could be held to. I think you 2 should sit on that bench and look like parents having a rest. I think I should go and be a girl in a park. If there's a boy here my age, I'll find him, because there's nowhere else for a child to go in a place like this, and I'll talk to him, and you'll watch, and if anything's wrong you'll see it and come. And if his family come and they're horrible, we leave, and we've lost nothing but an afternoon. Her parents exchanged the look that married people use instead of a conversation. You've thought about this, her mother said. I think about everything, said Hermione, and got out of the car. She found him at the far end of the park, and the finding took 4 seconds, because he had made himself easy to overlook, and she had spent 2 lifetimes learning to look exactly there. There was a knot of boys by the slide, 4 or 5 of them, loud in the way of children who have learned that loudness keeps adults from asking questions, and at the center of them a large pink boy in a shell suit who could only be Dudley Dursley, holding court over a bag of crisps he was not sharing. And then, a careful distance away, at the edge of the grass where the mown part gave up and became nettles, sitting on the lowest rung of a climbing frame with his knees drawn up and his arms around them, was a thin, dark-haired boy in clothes that had been bought for someone 3 times his size. She did not let herself stop. Stopping would have been a tell. She crossed the grass at the unhurried pace of a girl with nothing in particular to do, and she did not look at him too long, and she did not look at him too little, and when she was close enough that not speaking would have been stranger than speaking, she sat down on the grass a sensible arm's length away, facing out at the park the same direction he was facing, and she said to the air in front of both of them, "Those swings are a war crime. Somebody's wrapped them right over the top. That's not even for using them, that's just to stop anybody else." He didn't answer. She felt him go still beside her, the particular stillness of a small animal that has learned that the safest response to anything new is to become furniture. She'd expected it. She kept her eyes on the swings. "I'm Hermione," she said. "We're not from here. My dad drove us out because my mum wanted to look at some gardens," which is the most boring sentence anyone's ever said, and I escaped. She picked a daisy out of the grass and started, with great seriousness, splitting its stem with her thumbnail. "I'm not going to ask if you want to play with them." She tipped her head a centimeter toward the slide in Dudley's gang. "They look like the kind of boys who think you're allowed to laugh at things." That got her something, not words. A breath that was not quite a laugh let out through the nose, the smallest possible admission that she had said a true thing. "I'm not allowed to laugh at things either," she went on conversationally, threading a second daisy onto the first. "I'm a swot, that's the official word for it. I read too much and I use long words and I correct people and it makes everyone want to put me in a bin. So I've decided I'd rather sit at the edge of the park with the nettles and the war crime swings than be in the middle of it with the crisp boys. The edge is better. You can see everything from the edge." A voice came at last, low and rusty, a voice that didn't get much practice. "You're sitting in my bit." "Am I?" She looked around, considering the grass with genuine respect. "It's a good bit, strategic. Back to the climbing frame so nobody can come up behind you, clear sightline to the gate, far enough from the loud ones that you'd hear them coming." She nodded slowly. "You chose well. I'll pay rent. I've got half a packet of polos and a conker from last autumn that I've been carrying around for no reason." She held them out on her flat palm, not looking at him directly, as you offer your hand to a dog that has been kicked. "Rent." A pause that went on a beat too long, the pause of someone doing sums about what a thing costs and what it might be hiding. Then a thin hand, the wrist too narrow, the cuff of the enormous jumper falling over half of it, reached out and took 1 polo, exactly 1, the minimum that politeness allowed and theft did not, and retreated. "Harry," he said. "Hello, Harry," said Hermione, and looked at the swings so he wouldn't see her face do the thing it badly wanted to do. She had promised herself she would go slowly, and she did, and it was the hardest thing she had attempted since waking under the cornflowers. Because everything in her wanted to grab him by the front of his ridiculous outsized jumper and tell him, "You're not nothing, you are the most important person who will ever sit in this park. There are people coming for you and some of them love you and some of them only want to use the love of the others. And one day you will stand in a forest and decide to die for people who didn't deserve a tenth of what you gave them. And I am here to make sure that day never comes." Everything in her wanted to say it. None of it would have helped. A child who has been told all his life that he is a liar and a burden and a freak does not believe the first person to call him a miracle. He believes the first person who is simply, reliably kind and keeps being kind when there is nothing in it for her, and that takes time, and she had time now. She had whole years of it, and she was going to spend them the right way even though it cost her something every minute to spend them slowly. So she talked about nothing. She told him the polos were the green packet, which was the superior packet, and invited him to disagree, and he didn't, but he took a second one when she pushed the packet a centimeter toward him. She told him a long, pointless story about a library book she kept 3 weeks overdue out of spite, and the fine she'd paid in 50-pence pieces to make the librarian count them. She asked him nothing about himself on purpose because being asked about yourself is what frightened children dread, and instead she left gaps, generous ones, the kind of silences a person can step into if he wants to and is allowed to leave empty if he doesn't. He started, slowly, to step into them. He told her when she complained about her cousin who was actually a maths whiz and made her look bad at family parties, that he had a cousin too, and that the cousin was the large pink one currently licking crisp dust off his fingers by the slide. He said it flatly, no complaint in it, which was worse than complaint. He told her when she said she was rubbish at football that he wasn't allowed to play football, and then stopped, the sentence cut off at the knee, because allowed was a word that opened doors he had been taught to keep shut. She let it lie. She didn't lean toward it. She picked another daisy. My birthday's in September, she said instead into the gap, giving him hers so the trade wasn't all one way. The 19th, I'll be 12. Hardly anyone comes because hardly anyone likes me, but my mum makes a cake shaped like whatever I'm obsessed with that year. And last year I was obsessed with the periodic table, so it was a cake shaped like a beaker, and it was brilliant, and I ate the whole thing myself over 4 days and regret nothing. She watched him out of the side of her vision. She watched the word birthday do something to his face, a flicker quickly hidden. When's yours? She asked lightly as though it didn't matter, as though she didn't already know it to the day. Soon, he said, the flatness again, the careful nothing voice. End of the month, the 31st. A pause. We don't really do them. What birthdays? Mine. She had known this. She had read it somewhere in the great ledger of his life, the cupboard and the spiders and the years of being the family ghost, the cousin's old socks for Christmas, the 50-pence and the tissue. She had known it as you know a fact. Hearing him say it in the flat voice of a child reporting the weather in a sunny park with a wood pigeon repeating itself on a wire, was a different category of knowing entirely, and it took everything she had not to let it show, because the one thing he could not survive right now was pity. Pity told him the story he already believed. She was not going to confirm the story. She was going to start, very quietly, to write a different one. That, said Hermione, is a scandal, and I'm going to fix it because I have decided, as of this exact moment, that you and I are friends and friends do birthdays. So consider yourself warned. The 31st is in 8 days. I'm coming back before then, and there will be cake, and you don't get a vote. She finished her daisy chain, a lopsided thing with too few flowers, and instead of putting it on her own head she reached over, slowly, telegraphing every inch so he could move away if he wanted to, and set it on his black hair where it sat crooked over one ear. There, now you're decorated, you have to keep me now, it's the rule. You can't unmeet someone who's put flowers on you. He went very still under her hand, and she took it back, and they sat side by side at the edge of the park looking out at the Warcrime swings, a thin boy with a daisy chain falling over one ear and a girl who had come back across the ruin of the world to put it there. Why are you being nice to me? Harry said. It wasn't suspicious, exactly. It was bewildered, which was worse, because suspicion at least imagined that nice things had reasons. He genuinely did not have a model in which a person was kind to him for free. She had known he would ask. She thought hard about the answer because it was the most important answer she would give all day, more important than anything about stones or diaries or the thing with no nose, and she had decided that the only answer that would work was the one that happened to be true. Because I looked at this whole park, she said, and you were the only person in it worth talking to. That's all. It's not a trick. People are nice to people they like. You're just not used to being the one who gets liked, so it feels like a trap. She shrugged easy and stood up and brushed the grass off her skirt. It isn't, eat the rest of the polos, they're the green ones. I'm going to go and make my parents take us all for chips, and I'm going to be very annoying about it until they say yes, and then I'm going to ask if you can come, because chips are also better with 2. She walked back across the grass without looking behind her, because looking behind her would have told him she wasn't sure he'd stay, and she was sure she had decided to be sure, and she went and stood in front of the bench where her parents were pretending to admire a flowerbed and said quietly, "His name's Harry. He's the one I came for. He doesn't think anyone's ever liked him. I want to take him for chips, and I need you to make it look normal." Her mother's face did a complicated thing and put itself away. Her father stood up off the bench and rolled his shoulders like a man bracing for a difficult extraction. "Right," he said, "then we'll make it look normal. Lead on." Getting permission was its own small operation, and Hermione ran it as she ran everything, which was thoroughly. She did not let her parents go to the door alone, because adults talking to adults over a child's head was how the child got disappeared from the conversation. She walked between them up the path of number 4, past the smug begonias, and her father knocked, and the door opened on a woman with a long pale face and a longer pale neck, who looked at the three of them on her step and arranged her features into the specific welcome a house-proud woman keeps for strangers she hopes are not selling anything. "Yes, good afternoon," said Hermione's father, in the warm professional baritone he used on nervous patients. "I do apologize for descending on you. We're the Grangers. We've been visiting the area, and my daughter's made friends with a young man in the park there. Harry, I think she's rather taken with him and wondered if he might be allowed to come for chips with us. We'd have him back within the hour, of course. We're staying just over by the Crescent." It was a masterpiece of a sentence, Hermione thought, listening to her father deploy it. It announced their respectability in 3 places, it asked for nothing alarming, and it used the word friends, which landed on the pale woman's face like a small slap. Petunia Dursley's eyes went to Hermione, then passed her toward the park, and something tightened around her mouth. "Harry," she repeated, in the voice of a woman saying a word she'd hoped not to hear from outsiders. Yes, well." She was performing a sum. Hermione could see it, the same sum Harry had done over the polos, weighing an afternoon free of him against the risk of these clean, smiling people noticing anything. The afternoon won, as it was always going to. "I suppose he's no trouble to you then. If he is, you bring him straight back. A beat. He can be a difficult child, tells stories. You mustn't believe everything he says." "Children do tell stories," said Hermione's mother pleasantly, and Hermione heard the temperature drop 3 degrees inside the pleasantness, and knew her mother had understood something on that doorstep that would not be ununderstood. "Ours certainly does. We find it rather charming. So Harry came for chips." He came reluctantly, summoned from the park by his aunt's sharp call and her sharper instruction to behave and to be grateful, delivered on the doorstep in a low voice she thought the Grangers couldn't hear, and which all 3 of them heard perfectly. He came in the back seat of the Grangers' car with Hermione, holding himself small against the door, the daisy chain gone from his hair now, and he watched the inside of the unfamiliar car with the wary attention of a child who has learned that new situations are mostly new ways to get into trouble. "It's all right," Hermione said to him, under the noise of her father starting the engine. "My parents are the good kind, you'll see. The worst thing about them is my dad's jokes, and even those are only fatal in large doses." "I heard that," said her father, pulling out. "You were meant to," said Hermione, and in the back seat, very quietly, so quietly that only she caught it, Harry laughed. A real one this time, not the breath through the nose, but an actual small broken sound, surprised out of him, immediately stifled, a child checking over his shoulder for the punishment that laughing usually brought. No punishment came. Her father caught Harry's eye in the rearview mirror and winked and went back to driving, and asked nobody in particular whether anyone had strong feelings about mushy peas, which he personally considered an abomination invented to ruin good chips, and was prepared to argue about it at length. "They're not an abomination," Harry said, to his own surprise, defending mushy peas in a stranger's car. "They're all right." "He's got sense, this one," her father announced to the windscreen in the grave tone of a verdict. "Hermione, you've finally found a friend with sense. I despaired of it. I thought you'd marry the dictionary. Dad, mushy peas it is, to the chip shop. Hold on to your principles." The chip shop was on a parade of gray shops by a roundabout, and they sat at a wobbling formica table in the window with newspaper-wrapped chips and a bottle of vinegar between them, and it was here, watching Harry eat, that her mother stopped pretending the afternoon was ordinary. Because Harry ate the way Hermione had only seen people eat at the very end, in the bad years, in the camps, in the safe houses where you did not know when food would come again. He ate fast and low over the table with one arm curved around the newspaper, a posture his body had learned before he had words for it, the posture of someone who has had food taken away, mid-meal often enough. That speed is a survival trait. He ate everything, the burnt ones at the bottom, the scrapings, and when Hermione's father said, without making anything of it, "Have mine, I've had a big lunch, I'll only fall asleep," and slid his portion across, Harry looked at the offered chips and then at her father with an expression that had no name Hermione wanted to say out loud, the look of someone being handed a thing he had been taught he was not allowed to want. "Go on," her father said, easy, already looking out the window at the roundabout. "You'd be doing me a favor. My wife watches my cholesterol like a hawk." "I do," her mother agreed. "It's a full-time job." Harry ate the chips. Her mother caught Hermione's eye across the table just for a second, and in that second a great deal passed between them, mother to daughter, dentist to strategist, 2 people who had both now seen the same thing and were both deciding, separately, what they were prepared to do about it. Her mother was a gentle woman. Her mother had also, Hermione knew, once chased a man down a high street for kicking a dog. There were limits to her mother's gentleness, and they had just been located. But none of that touched the table, because the table was for Harry, and Harry was, slowly, over chips and her father's terrible jokes and her mother's questions that never once asked him anything hard, beginning to thaw. He told them when asked that his favorite subject was nothing, because he wasn't allowed to be good at school, because being better than Dudley caused problems, and Hermione's mother said lightly that that was the saddest thing she'd heard all week, and that in their family being clever was practically compulsory, and Harry would have to keep up. He told them he'd never been to the seaside, really been, not counting one terrible night in a hut that he didn't explain, and her father declared this a tragedy that would have to be corrected before the summer was out. He told them when Hermione mentioned her new school starting in September that he was changing schools too. He thought somewhere, his aunt and uncle hadn't said where, somewhere far, he didn't know. Hermione kept her face still over that one, he didn't know yet. In 8 days a giant would tell him, she let it pass. Maybe we'll end up at the same one, she said instead, and let the sentence be light, and only she knew it was a vow. They took him back before the hour was out, because her father had promised the pale woman an hour, and Richard Granger was a man who kept his word even to people he had decided he disliked, and that was a kind of strength too, Hermione thought, the kind that doesn't need to lose its temper to win. At the door of number 4, Petunia took Harry back as you take back a borrowed tool, with a quick assessing glance to check he was undamaged and undamaging, and a tight thank you to the Grangers that was really a goodbye. But Hermione had positioned herself, and before the door could close she stepped up onto the step beside Harry and said, clearly, in the carrying voice of a polite child whom it would be very awkward to be seen to refuse, "Mrs. Dursley, I wanted to say thank you for letting Harry come. He was brilliant. I'm having a birthday-ish thing soon, and I'd love it if he could come to that too. And his birthday's the 31st, isn't it?" Harry said, "so I thought we might come back with a cake if that's all right, just a little one, it's no trouble, my mum loves making them." It was a trap built out of manners, and it worked the way manners traps work, by making the cruel thing also the embarrassing thing. Petunia Dursley could refuse a lonely boy a birthday cake in private with no cost at all. She could not easily do it on her own front step in front of a smiling, well-spoken family who would think the worse of her for it, and Petunia Dursley cared, more than she cared about almost anything, what the well-spoken thought of her. "I'm sure that's, if you must," Petunia said, which was a yes strangled into the shape of a no. "The 31st, briefly." "Brilliant," said Hermione. "We'll come in the afternoon." And then to Harry, who was standing in the doorway between the two worlds with the cold house at his back and the warm afternoon in front of him, she said, simpler, "See you in 8 days. I always come back when I say I will. You'll learn that about me. It's my most annoying quality." The door closed on him. She watched it close. She walked back to the car with her parents and did not let her face do anything until she was inside it with the doors shut. Nobody spoke until they were past the roundabout and out onto the road home, the gray closes of Little Winging falling away behind them. Then her mother said to the windscreen in a voice scrubbed very clean of feeling, "That child is hungry, not peckish, hungry. Did you see how he ate?" It was not a question. And that woman called him difficult before we'd asked a single thing. Difficult. He said please and thank you to everything. He tried to give Richard's chips back twice. Her hands were folded in her lap and they were not quite still. "I have been a dentist for 15 years. I know what a neglected child's teeth look like, and I know what a neglected child looks like at a table, and I did not drive out to Surrey today to find one, but I have, and I am not going to pretend I haven't." "No," said her father, "we're not going to pretend." Hermione sat in the back in the seat where Harry had sat an hour ago and looked at her own hands, the unscarred 11-year-old hands, and let her parents arrive in an afternoon, at a conclusion it had taken her the better part of 2 lifetimes to reach. That Harry was being starved in all the ways a person can be starved, in a tidy house on a tidy street where nothing was ever allowed to happen. She had not had to argue them to it. She had only had to drive them to the right park and let them see. That was the thing she had relearned about the truth all over again in the chip shop window. You did not have to make people believe it. You only had to stop hiding it from them. "I don't know what we can do," her mother said. "He's not ours. There are proper channels, social services, but those take an age and they don't always. And he's starting some new school in September away. His aunt said so." "We can be his," Hermione said. They both went quiet. "Not legally," she said. "I know we can't, not like that, but there's more than one way to be somebody's, isn't there? We can be the people he comes back to. We can be the table he gets to eat at. We can be the family that does his birthday and takes him to the actual seaside and writes to him at his new school and makes sure that wherever he goes and whatever happens to him, there's always one place in the world where he is wanted, no questions, no conditions, no being sent away when it gets difficult. We can be that. Starting now, we can decide it in this car and then we can just do it." She heard her own voice and didn't recognize the steadiness in it, the steadiness that had red names at a memorial. "I found him today. I'm not going to unfind him. I won't." Her father drove for a while without speaking. The road unspooled, the dual carriageway, the green coming back as the closes gave way to fields, the world widening as they left Little Winging behind. "All right," he said at last, and met her eyes in the mirror. "All right, Hermione, we'll be that. God knows we've got the spare cake-making capacity." He cleared his throat, which was what he did instead of letting his voice go. 8 days, your mother's going to need to know if he likes chocolate. Find out if he likes chocolate." "He's never been allowed chocolate cake in his life," Hermione said. "So we're going to start with chocolate cake." "Good," said her father. "Good, that's a place to start." She looked out the window at the fields going by. Somewhere behind her, in a brick box on a street that had voted never to let anything happen, Harry was being told to start the dinner. He had eaten until he was full today. A man had winked at him in a mirror. A girl had promised to come back and told him she always did, and some buried, stubborn, unkillable part of him had decided, against the whole weight of his 11 years, to believe her. She had felt it happen across the Formica table, the small click of a lock she had spent the afternoon picking. A week, then a birthday. Days after that, a giant on a rock in the sea, arriving to find that someone had reached Harry first. Hermione closed her eyes and let the car carry her home. The first letter from Harry arrived on the 26th, and Hermione's mother brought it up to her room held in both hands like something that might be evidence. It had come in the ordinary post, in an envelope with a stamp the wrong way up, addressed in pencil in a careful, cramped hand to Miss H. Granger, and Hermione had given him their address written on the back of a chip shop receipt as she got out of the car, telling him to write, telling him she'd write back the same day, telling him she was the sort of person who answered letters within the hour and he'd have to get used to it. She had not been certain he would. A child who has learned that reaching out gets your hand slapped does not reach out lightly. So when her mother brought the envelope up, Hermione took it and read it sitting on the floor with her back to the bed, in the spot where the war ledger lived behind the headboard, and the letter was 4 lines long and one of them was crossed out, and it was the best thing she had read in 2 lifetimes. Dear Hermione, it said, thank you for the chips. I have never been to a chip shop with people who let me have the whole bag before. He had crossed out a line here, scribbled hard, and she held it to the light and could just read under the scribble, I didn't think you would write back. He had decided not to say it. Then, my aunt says I am not to make a nuisance of myself, so this is not a nuisance, it is just to say thank you, from Harry. And then squeezed in at the very bottom, smaller, added after he had plainly decided the letter was finished, and then found he could not stop himself. Did you mean it about the new school? Are we really going to the same one? She wrote back the same hour, the way she'd promised, and her letter was a page and a half and contained no fewer than 3 jokes and a strong opinion about which biscuits were superior, and at the bottom of it, where he had put his small, frightened question, she put her answer where he would be sure to find it. Yes, I meant it. I always mean it. Some things are going to happen soon that will seem very strange and even frightening, and when they do, I want you to remember that strange is not the same as bad, and that you are not in trouble, and that I am not going anywhere. Whatever school they send you to, I will find you there. That is a promise, and I keep my promises, and you are about to spend the next several years discovering exactly how seriously I take them. It was the closest she let herself come to telling him. It was a door left open a crack, no more, so that when the giant and the letters and the impossible all came at him at once, there would be a sentence sitting in his pocket that said someone saw it coming and wasn't afraid. She sealed it before she could write more. The rest could wait. The rest would have years. They came for him on the 30th, because her father had a free day and because the seaside, he declared over breakfast, would not visit itself, and because a boy who had reached 11 without a proper birthday was a wrong that a Granger could not in conscience leave unrighted for a single summer longer. Number 4, when they arrived, had the look of a house under siege. There were letters on the doormat, a great drift of them, yellowish envelopes with green ink, and more of them poking from the gaps around the front door where someone had tried to seal it, and from an upstairs window came the muffled sound of a large man shouting at the architecture. Hermione knew this scene. She had read it in the ledger of his life, the letters multiplying, the boarded slot, the chimney, the eggs, the flight to the hut that would come tomorrow or the day after. The Dursleys were 3 days from running to a rock in the sea. They were just now far too busy losing their minds about parchment to care what became of the burden in the cupboard, which was, Hermione thought, watching Petunia wrench the door open with an envelope crumpled in her fist and her face the color of putty, the single most useful coincidence of timing she could have asked for. We've come for Harry, her father said cheerfully, giving no sign at all that the doorstep was knee-deep in impossible mail. Day outing the seaside, we did mention it. We'll have him back tomorrow evening or the day after if the traffic's a horror. You've clearly got rather a lot on. Petunia looked at the drift of letters and at the Grangers and at some private calculation in which a strange child being removed from the premises for 48 hours was just now the answer to several prayers at once. Take him, she said. Take him, yes, the whole, just. A letter slid off the pile and she kicked at it. He's to be. Go on then, boy, the Grangers are here. Harry came down the stairs with a plastic bag that held everything he owned worth bringing, which was not much, and he stopped dead at the bottom when he saw the 3 of them standing in the chaos of the hall, and something happened in his face that Hermione would keep for the rest of her life, a sort of disbelieving recalculation, the look of someone who had assumed the good thing was a mistake that would shortly be corrected, discovering that it had come back on purpose. You came back, he said. I told you I would, said Hermione. Most annoying quality. Get in the car, it's your birthday, we're going to the sea, and my dad's bought a kite he doesn't know how to fly and is going to be very proud of. The sea, when they reached it, was the color of pewter under a sky doing its best. and the wind came off it in great clean gusts that smelled of salt and chip fat and the particular green rod of seaweed drying on the tide line. And Harry stood at the top of the beach and looked at all of it without moving, taking it in like something he had been told about for years and never once believed was real. "It's loud," he said finally of the sea. "It's showing off," said Hermione. "It does that, come on." It was, by any reasonable measure, an ordinary day at an ordinary English beach. They ate sandwiches that turned out to contain sand by some law of physics that operated only at the coast. Her father flew the kite for 90 seconds before crashing it into the only other family on the beach and apologizing at length. Her mother rolled up her trousers and stood in the freezing surf and shrieked and refused to admit it was cold. They built something that was meant to be a castle and became, through poor planning, a sort of lumpy fort, and Harry, who had started the day flinching every time anyone moved quickly near him, ended it on his knees in the wet sand, directing the construction with the fierce focus of a boy who had never once in his life been allowed to be in charge of anything and had discovered he was good at it. And there was cake. Her mother produced it from a tin at the top of the beach in the late afternoon, a chocolate cake, lopsided because it had ridden in the boot, with 11 candles that would not stay lit in the sea wind no matter how her father cupped his big careful hands around them. And they sang, the three Grangers, badly and loudly, as you are required to sing it. And Harry sat cross-legged in the sand with the cake in front of him and the candles guttering, and he looked at the small flames and did not seem to know what he was supposed to do. "You blow them out," Hermione said gently, "and you make a wish. You don't tell anyone the wish or it doesn't count. That's the only rule, and it's a stupid rule, but it's the rule." He looked at the candles a moment longer. Then he leaned in and blew, and the wind helped, and they all went out at once, and her father cheered, and her mother cut the cake into slices too big to be sensible, and Harry ate his first piece of birthday cake on a pewter beach with sand in it and chocolate at the corner of his mouth and an expression he had no practice arranging. And Hermione looked away at the sea so he could have the moment without an audience, and let the wind take the heat out of her own eyes before anyone saw. They drove him back the next evening, brown from the wind, with a bag that now held a paper kite of his own and 3 more books than he'd left within half a chocolate cake in a tin that her mother pressed on him with instructions to hide it from his cousin. At the corner of Privet Drive, where she'd asked her father to stop short of the house, Hermione walked Harry the last little way alone, the two of them on the empty pavement in the long July light. "It's going to get strange now," she said. "Soon. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, stranger than anything that's ever happened to you, and some of it's going to be frightening, and people are going to tell you things about yourself that sound impossible." She stopped and made him look at her. "I need you to remember 3 things. You're not in trouble, none of it is your fault, and I am coming. However it happens, whatever they tell you, I will find you, and you will not be doing any of it alone. Can you remember 3 things? You always come back when you say you will," Harry said slowly, giving her back her own words, testing them, finding they held. You keep saying that. "Because it's the truest thing about me," said Hermione. "Happy birthday, Harry. Now go on and eat the cake before Dudley finds it." She watched him walk up the drive to the smug house with its drift of letters, the plastic bag and the kite and the tin of cake, a thin boy turning at the door to lift one hand to her before he went inside, and she stood on the corner of Privet Drive in the gold of the evening with the whole ruined future folded up small in her chest, and she thought, there, now you have somewhere to come back to. Now when the giant comes, you will not be a starving thing that follows the first hand that feeds it. You will be a boy who already has a family and a friend and a door of his own to stand in. Let them come now. Let all of them come. She had reached him first. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, Diagon Alley, done differently at midnight on the 31st of July, Hermione lay awake under the cornflowers and did the hardest thing she had done since waking, which was nothing. Somewhere on the western coast, on a rock in a heaving sea, a half-giant was at this moment breaking down the door of a miserable hut, and a boy with a thin face and her letter folded in the pocket of his cousin's cast-off trousers was about to be told the truth about himself. She knew the scene to the syllable. She knew the pink umbrella and the slightly squashed birthday cake Hagrid would produce from inside his enormous coat, and the pig's tail he'd put on Dudley, and Harry saying, small and disbelieving, "But I'm just Harry." She could have been there. She had spent 3 days running the arithmetic of being there, of somehow getting herself to that coast, of meeting Hagrid at the door with the truth already in hand, and she had concluded every time that it was the wrong move. A strange girl on a storm-lashed rock at midnight would frighten everyone and explain nothing. Better to plant a sentence in his pocket and let the giant do the giant's job. Better to be the calm voice he carried into the noise, not another piece of the noise. So she lay still and let it happen 100 miles away and trusted the letter, and that was a new kind of difficult. She had spent the war learning to act. Nobody had warned her that the second life would require her to learn all over again when not to. His letter came 4 days later, and it was 6 pages long, and the handwriting got bigger and wilder as it went, and she read it twice sitting on her bedroom floor and then a third time aloud to her parents at the kitchen table, because some news is too large to keep behind one set of teeth. Hermione, it began, and then underlined 3 times, I am a wizard. There was a giant. His name is Hagrid, and he is the size of a shed, and he was crying when he gave me a birthday cake, and he put a tail on Dudley, which I am not supposed to think is funny, but I think is the funniest thing that has ever happened in the history of the world. My mum and dad were not in a car crash. They were magic. They were killed, Hermione, by a man so bad people won't say his name. And everyone knows who I am. There's a scar, and Hagrid took me to London to a pub that muggles can't see, and then to street. Oh, the street, I can't even. There were owls and brooms and a bank run by goblins, and I have gold. I have a whole pile of gold my parents left me, and I bought an owl. She's white, and she's the most beautiful thing I have ever seen, and I've called her Hedwig out of a book. And then near the end, the writing going small and careful where it had been wild, I kept thinking about what you wrote, about Strange not being bad, about you finding me. I had it in my pocket the whole time, and when it got too much I put my hand on it. You knew. How did you know it was coming? You said soon, and it was soon. I'm not cross. I just want to understand you, because you're the only thing in all of this I already had before it started. Hermione put the letter down on the kitchen table and looked at her own hands until they stopped wanting to shake. He sounds happy, her mother said, which was a mother's reading and a true one. He did. The wildness of the handwriting was happiness, the first uncomplicated happiness she had ever seen out of him, and she would not let anything take the shine off it. But under the happiness she could read the other thing, the thing he had buried in a question near the end. How did you know? He was 11 and starving for belonging, and she had appeared in his park with a chip shop receipt and impossible foreknowledge, and he was not stupid. He had never been stupid, and a clever, hungry child handed a person who seems to know the future will love that person and study that person in the same breath. She had a few years before the study turned into a question she could no longer deflect. She intended to use them to earn the truth slowly, so that when she finally gave it to him it landed as a gift between equals and not as a bomb. He's coming shopping with us, she said. He has to. He went round Diagon Alley once with a giant and no one to tell him what any of it meant, and that's not how you should see the most wonderful place in the world. He should see it with friends. Diagon Alley, said her father, savoring it. Is that what it's called, the magic street? That's what it's called, and we're allowed muggles. He tried the word out carefully, a man learning the name of his own newly discovered species. Someone comes to take you the first time, Hermione said. A witch or a wizard to show you the bank and how the money works and how to get through the wall. She had a sudden, vivid memory of a woman in emerald robes with her hair in a tight bun, a memory from the wrong direction in time, and pushed it down. I'll write tonight. We'll all go together and I'll show Harry everything, and it'll be the best day any of us has ever had. She did write that night. She wrote to Harry, and she wrote more carefully, a polite and slightly helpless letter to the school explaining that her muggle parents would be grateful for guidance, and that her friend Harry Potter, who had no one to take him a second time, might join their party. She did not know who would answer. She knew with the cold certainty of the ledger that whoever answered would be a thread that ran back to a white-bearded hand, and that the hand would be interested, very interested, to learn that Harry Potter had a friend already, a friend who had found him before the giant did. Let him be interested, she thought, and sealed the letter. Let him wonder. A man who is wondering about you is a man who is reacting to you, and a man who is reacting is a man who is one move behind. She spent the waiting days with the ledger open on the floor, planning the year as a general plans a campaign she has already lost once and does not intend to lose again. The thing about foreknowledge, she had decided, was that it was a wasting asset. Every move she made spent a little of it, because the world she remembered and the world she was living in had already begun to diverge, and the further they diverged the less her memory was worth. She had reached Harry a month early. That alone would ripple. A Harry who arrived at Hogwarts fed and chosen and quietly armed was a different boy from the one the future had been built around, and different boys made different choices, and the future would bend around the differences until at some point her map stopped matching the country. So the rule was simple. Use the foreknowledge early while it was still gold on the moves that mattered most and could be made soonest. Hoard nothing. A memory saved for later was a memory that might be worthless by later. She made her list. Year 1 had 3 objectives, and she wrote them small. First, quarrel in the stone. The stone was at the school now, hidden behind a set of obstacles she could recite in her sleep, guarded by a man with a monster on the back of his head. In her first life, a trio of 11-year-olds had stumbled through those obstacles in June, half by luck, and Harry had nearly died with Quirrell's hands burning to ash around his throat. She was not going to wait until June, and she was not going to leave it to luck. She would deny the parasite its prize on her own schedule cleanly before it ever got close, and she would do it in a way that left Dumbledore believing the credit was his. Second, the diadem. A tarnished crown in a room full of hidden things, 50 years untouched, a piece of a dead man's soul gathering dust where she could reach it without anyone in the world knowing she had. The easiest of all the horcruxes, the one nobody was guarding because nobody but her and its maker knew it was there. She would have it before Christmas. Third, and this one she underlined, tell Harry nothing he cannot yet carry, and tell Dumbledore nothing at all. The first 2 objectives were chess. The third was the whole game. The moment the white-bearded hand understood that someone at his school could see the board as he saw it, he would stop treating her as a variable and start treating her as a threat, and a Dumbledore who saw her as a threat was a problem she did not yet have the pieces to solve. She sat back against the bed and looked at the 3 lines for a while, and then, because she was alone, she let the other thing come up, the thing the ledger could not hold. She let herself think about June in the dungeons, and a wand at a tower's foot, and a forest, and a great hall full of the dead laid out in rows under a ceiling that showed the dawn. She let herself remember that she had walked these moves before and lost everyone, that the list on the floor was not strategy, not really. It was a war memorial written forwards instead of backwards, every objective a name she was refusing to read aloud a second time. Then she closed the book and slid it behind the headboard and went downstairs to be 11, because the campaign did not start with grief. It started with a shopping trip. The escort, when she arrived, was not the woman in emerald robes, and Hermione filed the absence away with interest. It was a brisk, harassed young witch from something called the Muggle Liaison Office, with ink on her fingers and a great many forms, who introduced herself as Miss Pinner and clearly regarded the whole excursion as an interruption to more important paperwork. She had been told to escort the Granger family. She had not, her forms suggested, been told anything about a second child, and she frowned at Harry on the Granger's doorstep with the particular irritation of a bureaucrat handed an unscheduled variable. "You're not on the form," Miss Pinner said. "He's with us," said Hermione before her parents could be helpful. "His relatives can't bring him, and the school said it was fine for him to come with our party. There'll be a note. There's always a note." She said it with the bored confidence of a child who has been told this is how things are done, and she watched Miss Pinner decide that arguing would generate more paperwork than acquiescing, which was, Hermione had learned across 2 lifetimes, the load-bearing principle of every bureaucracy that had ever existed. "Fine," said Miss Pinner. "Fine. Everyone holds something of mine. Will flew from your. Do you have a no? Of course you don't. We'll take the night bus. Oh joy." It was, Hermione thought, almost perfect. A liaison officer who hadn't been briefed on Harry was a liaison officer who hadn't been chosen for this trip by anyone with an interest in Harry. The hand had not reached for this one. Either the news of Harry's new friend hadn't yet climbed high enough to matter, or it had, and the response was to watch and wait rather than to insert a chaperone. Both possibilities were useful. Both told her she still had room to move. The night bus was purple and violent and exactly as appalling as she remembered, and her father loved it, openly and without dignity, gripping the brass rail and laughing every time the whole vehicle leapt across 40 miles of England with a bang, while her mother sat with her eyes shut and a hand over her mouth, and Harry sat between them with his new owl's cage on his knees, watching the impossible city fold and unfold past the windows, and Hermione watched Harry because watching Harry see magic again. With people beside him this time was its own reward, and she intended to collect it. The leaky cauldron was dim and low-beamed and smelled of wood smoke and old beer, and the moment they came through the door Hermione made 3 calculations before her eyes had finished adjusting. 1. The room was watching Harry, the small ripple of recognition spreading from the bar outward, hands nudging hands, the word Potter passing mouth to mouth. 2. She needed to get him through it fast, because a child learning he is famous is a child being taught that strangers own a piece of him, and she would not have him learn it. 3. And this one she felt in the soles of her feet and the roots of her teeth. At a table in the darkest corner, hunched over a glass he wasn't drinking, with a purple turban wound around his head and a tremor in his hands, sat a thin, sallow, twitching man she had last seen as a ruin of ash on a stone floor. Quirinus Quirrell. And riding the back of his skull under the silk, pressed against the bone, the thing that had murdered Harry's parents and would, given a body and a year, murder its way across the whole of Britain. She did not look at him for more than a second. She had learned that too in the bad years, that the most dangerous thing you can do to a watching enemy is let him see you see him. She swept her gaze past Quirrell to the fireplace and back to her father, and she kept her face the open, delighted face of a girl on the best day of her life, and underneath it the strategist made a clean note in a clean hand. He's here. He's already failed at Gringotts. The break-in was the day Harry came with Hagrid. The stone's been moved to the school by now, so he's regrouping. He's wearing the body he'll wear all year. He's weak, he's afraid, he's sharing a skull with a parasite that despises him. He will never be more killable than he is in the months ahead, and I am the only person in this room who knows it. Hermione, her mother's hand on her shoulder. "You went somewhere." "Just looking," said Hermione. "It's a lot to take in. Come on, the wall's this way. Harry, you're going to want to watch this part. It's the best bit. A man taps a brick and the whole world opens up." She steered them toward the back courtyard with her hand light on Harry's sleeve, and as they went she felt it, the faint prickle of attention from the dark corner, Quirrell's eyes, or the eyes of the thing behind Quirrell's eyes, tracking the famous boy across the room. Harry's hand came up halfway to his forehead and stopped. "My scar," he murmured to her, frowning, rubbing it. "It went sort of hot just then. That's weird, right?" "It's not nothing," Hermione said quietly, marking the confirmation, keeping her voice even. Tell me every time it does that, every single time, no matter how small. Will you do that for me? It's important, and I'll explain why when I can, and for now I need you to trust that I'm not asking idly." He looked at her, this strange friend who knew things, and he nodded, because he had decided in a chip shop a week ago to trust her, and he was not a boy who decided things by halves. "Every time," he said. "Good," said Hermione, and tapped the bricks in her memory 3 up and 2 across, though Miss Pinner's wand did the actual tapping. And the wall unfolded itself into the long, crooked, golden length of Diagon Alley, and Harry made a sound beside her that was worth every mile of the purple bus. And for a moment, just one, she let herself stop being a general and stand in the sun of the alley next to him and simply be glad. Gringotts swallowed them in marble and cool air and the dry rustle of 100 quills, and her father stood in the great hall and turned a slow circle with his head tipped back, a dentist from Hampstead in the Bank of the Goblins, and whispered, "It's bigger on the inside, that can't be right." The frontage was 30 feet, and Hermione loved him so much she had to look at the floor. She watched the goblins while her parents changed a careful sum of Muggle money into a small heavy pile of gold and bronze and silver, and the goblins watched everyone, with the flat patience of a people who had been keeping wizards' valuables for 1,000 years, and keeping a longer, quieter ledger of grievances alongside. She knew things about this bank that no 11-year-old should know. She knew which deep vault held a small golden cup with a badger etched on its side, a cup that was not a cup but a wound in the world, sitting behind dragonfire and goblin steel in the keeping of a family that would not miss it because they did not know what it truly was. She knew the goblins resented every wizard treasure locked in their lower vaults, resented the old theft at the bottom of the whole arrangement, as a craftsman resents a buyer who thinks a thing bought is a thing owned. She knew in short that there was a key here she might one day need, and that it was made not of metal but of grievance, and she filed the shape of it away to be cut later. "You've that look again," her mother murmured, "the plotting look." "I'm just doing sums," said Hermione, which was true, and watched a goblin stamp a ledger with a seal and thought, soon, not today, but soon. Ollivander's was narrow and dim and stacked to its high ceiling with thousands of slim boxes, and the dust in it hung gold in the single shaft of light from the window, and the moment they stepped inside the noise of the alley fell away to nothing, the way sound falls away in a place that takes itself very seriously. "Miss Granger," said the soft voice from the shadows, and old Mr. Ollivander came forward on silent feet with his pale wide eyes catching the light, and Mr. Potter. He looked at Harry for a long moment. "I wondered when I would see you again so soon. You were here in July with Rubius, holly and phoenix feather 11 inches supple, a curious wand for you to end with, curious." His gaze moved, and something behind the pale eyes sharpened. "And here you are once more, and not alone this time. You have made a friend." "I have," said Harry, and there was a thread of something fierce in it, a small flag planted, and Hermione marked it and kept her face calm. She let Ollivander fit her properly, because she could not very well refuse, and because she wanted to know whether the wand would be the same. It was. Box after box, the old man's quick murmur, the failures, the near misses, and then her hand closed on vine wood and dragon heartstring, 10 3/4 inches, and the warmth ran up her arm like a key turning in a lock she had thought was sealed shut forever, and red and gold sparks fountained from the tip, and she had to press her lips together hard. Because the last time this wand had been in her hand, it had been doing something at the end that she would not let herself remember in a sunlit shop with Harry watching. "Curious," said Ollivander again, very softly, looking at her now and not at the wand, and she did not like how he looked at her, the look of a man who measures wands by measuring the people who hold them, and had just found a reading he did not expect in a girl of 11. "You hold it like you have held one before." Like an old friend returned, he tilted his head. "Have we met, Miss Granger?" "I don't think so," said Hermione, smiling, lying with the whole front of her face while the back of her mind slammed a door. "I read a great deal. Maybe I just felt like I knew what to do." "Maybe," said Ollivander in the tone of a man who did not believe her and was too courteous and too curious to say so, and he wrapped her wand in brown paper, and the moment passed and she breathed again. One more person who had looked at her a half-second too long. She was collecting them. She would have to be more careful or learn not to care, and she was not yet sure which. Madame Malkins had Harry up on a stool with a robe pinned around him within a minute of the bell over the door, and on the next stool, already half-fitted, stood a pale, pointed boy with white blonde hair who turned his head, took in Harry's owless arms and ordinary face, and decided in under a second that here was someone to talk down to. Hermione had been waiting for this one. She remembered it faintly from Harry's own retelling years ago, the snobbish boy in the robe shop, the first sneer of the wizarding world. In her first life it had planted a seed of mutual loathing that had grown for 7 years and cost more than either of them ever admitted. She had decided, on the floor with the ledger, that she was not in the business of harvesting enmities she could simply decline to plant. Hogwarts too. The pale boy drawled at Harry in the bored voice of someone reciting lines he'd heard from his father. My father's next door buying my books and mother's up the street looking at wands. Then I'm going to drag them off to look at racing brooms. I don't see why first years can't have their own. I think I'll bully father into getting me one. He didn't wait for an answer, which told Hermione everything about who he was used to talking to. Know what house you'll be in yet. I'll be in Slytherin, all our family have been. Imagine being in Hufflepuff. I think I'd leave, wouldn't you? Harry's chin had come up and she could see the retort gathering, the cold dislike she remembered, the moment about to set into a shape that would last 7 years. She stepped in front of it, easy and bright, a girl admiring robes. Hufflepuff's the house that values loyalty and hard work, she said, conversational, not arguing, just informing, the most disarming register she owned. It's where you put people who'd never sell you out. Funny thing to look down on that when you think about it. I'd want a few of those around. Everyone needs people who won't sell them out. She tilted her head at the blonde boy with open, friendly curiosity. You're a Malfoy, aren't you, Draco? The hair gives it away. It's in the book, the big one about the old families. There's a whole page on your lot. She said it as a compliment because to a child raised on his family's importance, being known was a kind of food, and she watched him fail to find the insult he'd been braced for install. You've read about my family, Draco said, recalibrating, the sneer losing its footing. I read about everyone, said Hermione. I read about the Blacks and the Longbottoms and the Weasleys and your lot. It's all just history. Half the old families are tangled up with each other 3 different ways. It's fascinating. Your grandmother was a Black, which makes you cousins with half the people you're about to insult at school, so I'd go easy. She smiled at him. I'm Hermione. This is Harry. We're not anyone you've read about. We're just going to be very good at school, that's all, so it's nice to meet the competition early. It threw him completely. He had a script for the odd and a script for the hostile, and no script at all for a girl who treated his bloodline as a topic of mild scholarly interest and his rudeness as beneath comment. He looked at Harry, who was watching Hermione operate with the dawning respect of a boy realizing his friend was a kind of weapon, and then he looked back at her, and something in his pointed face that had been arranged into contempt rearranged itself fractionally into wariness, which from a Malfoy was nearly courtesy. Malfoys are usually the competition, he said, trying the new ground. Then we'll have a lovely time, said Hermione. Madame Malkin, pronounced Draco, finished before he could decide how to feel about any of it, and he climbed down off the stool, and at the door he paused and looked back at the two of them. And for a moment he was just an 11-year-old who had been raised lonely in a cold house by a man who taught contempt instead of love, which Hermione knew because she knew where this particular thread ran and how it frayed. I'll see you at school then, he said, and it came out almost human, and then he was gone into the alley. Through the shop window she watched him cross to a tall man in immaculate black with a silver-headed cane and a fall of the same white hair, a man who put a gloved hand on his son's shoulder not with affection but with ownership, and steered him away up the crowded alley. Lucius Malfoy. She held very still and let him go by on the other side of the glass, the wizard who in a year would slip a small black diary into a schoolgirl's cauldron and open a chamber under the school and very nearly kill the little red-haired girl from the bookshop. He didn't glance at the window. He had no reason to. He didn't know that an 11-year-old behind the glass had just memorized the exact set of his shoulders and added a line to a ledger. The diary, she thought, watching the silver cane recede. You still have it, you're carrying it around like a loaded thing you don't understand, and next September you'll use it, and this time I'll be ready, and this time the little girl reads her own books and doesn't write back to any that write to her. You were brilliant in there, Harry said low beside her. I wanted to hit him, you made him almost nice. Hitting him is what he expects, said Hermione. Half of what people do, they do because someone expected it of them. Change the expectation and you change the person, sometimes, not always. She turned from the window. Come on, robes are sorted, now the fun part, books. She spent the rest of the day arming them and disguising the arming as the ordinary greed of a bookish child let loose in the best bookshop in the world. Flourish and Blots was 3 stories of teetering shelves and the smell of new paper and old leather, and she went through it like a quartermaster pretending to be a magpie. The set texts went in the basket, of course, the spellbooks and the potion primer and the history that lied by omission about a great many things. And then between them, where her parents would see only an enthusiastic girl unable to choose, she slipped the other things. A book on defensive magic 3 years above their level. A thin volume on magical maladies that happened to have a long chapter on the bites of venomous beasts. A guide to magical Britain's old families that would tell Harry, gently and on paper rather than from her impossible mouth, who the players were before he had to meet them. A book about the mind, about the discipline of closing it, because there were at least 2 people who would try to read theirs before the year was out, and she wanted Harry learning the shape of that wall early, as a game, long before either of them needed it as armor. That's a lot of books, Harry said, hefting the basket, which had become heavy. It's the correct number of books, said Hermione. There's no such thing as a lot of books, there's only books and cowards. She steered him toward the till and then lower just to him under the noise of the shop. Harry, I'm going to ask you to read some of these even though no one's setting them, the defensive one especially, and I'm going to teach you a few things on the train and at school that we're technically too young for, and when I do, I need you to not ask me how I know they work, not yet. One day I'll tell you everything, all of it, I swear it on Hedwig, but the price of the everything is patience, and I need you to pay it in installments. She held his eyes. We're going to be very good at this, you and me. Better than anyone expects two first years to be. But only if we start now, and only if you trust me when I do things that don't make sense yet, can you? He looked at her over the top of a tower of books in a golden shop, a thin boy with a famous scar and a new owl at home and a friend who talked like no 11-year-old he had ever met, and whatever he saw in her face decided him. You found me in a park, he said simply. Nobody else ever did. I'll read the books. It was then, turning from the till with the heavy basket between them, that she saw the Weasleys. There were a lot of them and they were very red, a cluster of them by the second-hand shelf, a harassed kind mother counting heads, a small girl with a fierce face who wasn't shopping for herself yet and didn't know that a diary was coming for her, and two boys exactly the same, two identical grinning boys jostling each other over a book of jokes, and Hermione's whole chest went to water at the sight of them. Because she had last seen those two boys as one boy laughing and one boy with the laugh gone out of his face forever, and here they were, both of them, alive, indistinguishable, arguing about whose turn it was to hold the gold, and the ordinary miracle of it was almost more than she could stand in a public shop. She made herself look away. She made herself breathe through it. Not yet. You can't save them yet, and you can't grieve them now. They're not even in danger today. Look away, soldier, look away. You all right, said Harry, who noticed things, who had always noticed things, who had survived a childhood by noticing the smallest changes in the faces of dangerous people. Red-haired family, she said, recovering, giving him a true thing in place of the truth. I've got a feeling we'll know them well, the twins especially. Keep your gold away from the twins, I mean that as practical advice. She managed something that was nearly a grin. Come on. We need an all-treats budget in your trunk, and I want to look at the cauldrons, even though we both know pewter is pewter. They stopped near the end at Florian Fortescue's, where her father bought a round of sundaes he could not pronounce, and her mother declared the whole alley a public health triumph on the grounds that nobody could find your teeth under all this magic. And the four of them sat at a little iron table in the late gold light, with the crowd thinning around them, and the owls beginning their evening fidget in the shop across the way. Her parents drifted to the next table to puzzle over a wizarding newspaper whose photographs moved, leaving the two children a pocket of their own, and Harry, who had been quiet for a while under the weight of the most enormous day of his life, turned his spoon over in a melting scoop of something that tasted of treacle and starlight and asked her the question she had been waiting for him to ask since the rock in the sea. The one who killed my parents, he said low, so the word wouldn't carry. Hagrid wouldn't say his name. People go white, there's a scar. He touched his forehead without seeming to know he'd done it. You read about everyone, so you read about him. Tell me. Nobody's told me anything true, they just go quiet, and I'd rather know the true thing even if it's bad. I'm used to bad. She put her own spoon down and gave it to him straight, because he had asked for the true thing and he had earned the true thing, and because a frightened child who is told the shape of the danger is less frightened than a child told nothing and left to imagine it. His name is Voldemort, she said quietly, and watched Harry hear it spoken without the room ending. People are afraid even of the name, which is silly, because a name is just a sound, and being afraid to say it only makes it bigger. He was a wizard. A brilliant one, maybe the most gifted student the school ever had, and he took all that brilliance and used it to make himself afraid of nothing, especially of dying, and a person who builds his whole life around not dying ends up unable to do anything else. He gathered followers. He killed people who disagreed with him and people who got in his way and people who were simply in the wrong place, and for about 10 years he was winning, and then he came to your parents' house. She held his eyes. Your mother could have stepped aside, he told her to. She didn't. She died in front of your cradle rather than move, and that is not a small thing, Harry. That is the largest thing a person can do, and when he turned his wand on you, the thing your mother did got in the way of it, and the curse that should have killed you broke on you and rebounded on him and tore him out of his body instead. That's the scar. That's why people know your name. You're the only person who ever survived him, and you were 1 year old, and you didn't survive him because you were special. You survived because you were loved on purpose by someone who chose you over her own life. I think that's a better story than the one where you're just famous. I think it's the truest thing about you, the same way keeping promises is the truest thing about me. Harry sat very still with the melted ice cream going to syrup in front of him, and his eyes were too bright, and he didn't try to hide it from her, which was its own quiet landmark. Is he dead? He asked. Voldemort. This was the moment she had to be most careful, and she had decided long ago how she would walk it. No, she said, not all the way, tearing yourself out of a body that violently leaves something behind, a kind of remnant, less than a ghost. Most people think he's gone for good. I think he's patient, and I think he'll try to come back, and I think it might even be soon. She let that sit. I'm telling you because I won't lie to you and I won't keep you in the dark to protect you. That's what everyone else does, and it never protects anyone, it just leaves them unready. So here's the deal I'm offering. We get ready. Quietly, the two of us starting now so that when he reaches for you, and he will, he finds a boy who saw it coming and isn't a frightened 1-year-old anymore. That's why the extra books. That's why I'll teach you things we're too young for, not to scare you, to make sure that the next time you and he are in a room together, the surprised one is him. You really think it'll be soon, Harry said. I think this year is going to be more interesting than anyone's told you to expect, she said, which was as close to the whole truth as she would come over ice cream. And I think you should trust me, and I think you should finish that before it becomes soup, because my mum will not let any of us leave until every bowl is empty. It's a dentist thing, she has views. It surprised a laugh out of him, a real one, the kind that came easier each day now, and the dangerous moment turned over into an ordinary one, which was the trick of it, the thing she had relearned all summer. You could hand a child the worst news in the world and he could carry it if you handed it to him across a table with ice cream on it and your own steadiness underneath, and if the very next sentence reminded him that the world still contained mothers with views about empty bowls. He ate the rest of it. Her father came back delighted, having learned that the newspaper's lead photograph waved at him whenever he turned the page, and her mother gathered them with the brisk competence of a woman herding her flock toward a purple bus she had decided to be brave about, and they went up the golden alley into the evening, 4 people and a great many parcels. One of them a girl who had just told a boy the truest version of his own life and watched him grow an inch under the weight of it. The rest of August, Harry mostly lived at the Grangers, because the Dursleys raised no objection to being relieved of him, and because Hermione had quietly decided that a boy ought to spend the weeks before his first term somewhere that the word home did not have quotation marks around it. And they worked, the two of them, in the garden in the long gold evenings, because she had told him they would, and because he had said he would read the books and meant it. She started him gently, with the one charm she wanted in his hands before anyone at school ever pointed a wand at him, the simple, stubborn shield that turned a thrown thing aside. She made him do it badly and then less badly, and then on a Tuesday with the midges rising off the lawn properly, a faint silver curve springing off the end of his wand and holding while she lobbed a tennis ball at it and the ball bounced wide, and Harry laughed out loud, a free uncomplicated sound that had no checking over the shoulder in it at all, and her father, watching from the kitchen window with a tea towel over his shoulder, raised both fists over his head in silent triumph. Again, said Hermione. 11 more times until it's boring. Why always 11, Harry complained, already raising his wand. Because boring is the point, she said. Anyone can do a spell when they're calm and showing off. The trick is doing it when you're frightened, and the only way to make a frightened hand do a thing is to make a bored hand do it 10,000 times first until it stops needing you to think about it at all. I'm not teaching you a party trick, Harry. I'm teaching you how to still be standing when it matters. There's a difference, and the difference is the boring repetitions, and I love you too much to skip them. She heard the word leave her mouth before she decided to spend it, and she did not take it back, and Harry went still for a second as he did when a good thing landed, and then he raised his wand and cast the shield again, and again 11 times without another word of complaint, and she sat on the grass in the dusk and watched the child she had crossed a war for learn to defend himself one bored, patient, life-saving repetition at a time. And thought that there were worse ways to spend an August than teaching someone you loved how to refuse to die. September the 1st came gray and bright over King's Cross, and the Granger family arrived early because Hermione had insisted on early, and they collected Harry's trunk from the boot, the trunk her father had repacked himself, because the one the Dursleys had given him had clearly been chosen to fail on the journey. Her father carried the trunk, and her mother walked with an arm not quite around Harry's shoulders, near enough to be a wing, and Hermione walked in front because she knew the way, and at the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 she stopped them and turned and looked at the 2 people who had driven her into Surrey and believed her about a salt cellar and made a cake on a beach, and she found she had to say it before they went through. "Thank you," she said, "for all of it, for believing me. No, I've been strange this summer. I know I've asked you to trust things you couldn't see. You did it anyway." She looked at her mother. "You taught me what a family does. I'm just doing it to one more person." Her mother's eyes were bright. "Go on," she said, "before you set me off in a train station. Write to us, both of you, every week, or I'll come up there on that purple bus and embarrass you in front of the whole school. And don't think I won't. I've nothing left to lose. I've already met a goblin." "Through the wall," Hermione said to Harry, and took his hand, because the first time through is frightening if you do it alone, and she was not going to let him do one more frightening thing alone. At a run, don't stop, don't think, with me. 1, 2. They went through together, 2 children hand in hand, the trolley rattling, the brick swallowing them whole, and came out the other side into steam and scarlet and the cry of owls and the great gleaming engine of the Hogwarts Express. And Harry stood on the platform with his hand still in hers and his face turned up to the impossible train, and Hermione looked at him looking at it, armed now, fed now, chosen now, no longer a starving thing waiting for the first hand that fed him, and she thought, Let the year begin, let the thing under the turban make its move. This time the board is not his, and the orphan he hunts is not alone, and I have read the last page of this book, and I did not like the ending, so I am going to write a different one. Come on, she said aloud and pulled him gently toward the train. Let's find a compartment. We've got a lot to talk about and a long way to go, and I want the window seat. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The Sorting and the Serpent's Shadow. They found an empty compartment near the back of the train, and Hermione took the window seat she had claimed at the barrier, and the moment the door slid shut and the platform began to slide away, she stopped being a girl on holiday and started, very quietly, being a teacher. Right, she said, taking her wand out of her sleeve and laying it on her knee where Harry could see it. Before anyone else turns up and we have to be normal at them. Watch my fingers, not the wand. The wand's just where the magic comes out. The work happens here. She tapped her temple. Most people teach it backwards. They teach the words first and the wand movement second and the wanting last, and the wanting is the only part that matters. You don't push the magic. You want a thing so precisely that the wand can't pretend it doesn't understand, like this. She pointed at the blind that hung half down over the window, and she did not say a word, and the blind rolled itself smartly up to the top with a snap. That's the secret they make you wait years to be told. Wandrick and Latin are training wheels. The real thing is underneath, and it's just a tension, very, very sharp. Harry looked at the blind and at her and at his own wand, holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, supple. You didn't say anything. Had practice, said Hermione, which was the largest understatement of 2 lifetimes. You'll say the words are scaffolding, and there's no shame in scaffolding. Here, we'll start with the one every first year learns at Halloween, and we'll learn it in September, because being one festival ahead is a small unfair advantage, and I collect those. Wingardium Leviosa. It's a swish and a flick, and the wanting is up, but specifically up gently, like lifting a sleeping cat you don't want to wake. He got it on the 4th try, a feather she'd brought for the purpose wobbling up off the seat and hanging there, drunk and triumphant, and the grin that broke over his face was worth more to her than any Horcrux on her list. She made him do it 11 more times until it was boring, because the thing nobody told you about war was that it was won in the boring repetitions long before the dramatic moments, and a spell you could do when you were calm and bored was a spell you could do when you were terrified, and a spell you could only do when terrified was no spell at all. The door slid open around midday on a thin, freckled, red-haired boy with a smudge on his nose and a hand-me-down look to everything he wore, who asked, with the elaborate casualness of a boy braced to be refused, whether anyone minded if he sat down. Everywhere else was full. Sit, said Hermione before Harry could answer, and pulled her feet off the opposite seat to make room, because she knew this one, knew the brave, loyal, stubborn heart of him and the long road he had ahead and the loss waiting at the end of it that she intended to cancel. And because the freckled stranger at the door had no way of knowing that the bushy-haired girl waving him in had once, in a future that would now never happen, held his hand at his brother's grave. I'm Hermione. This is Harry. We've got too many sweets coming. You'd be doing us a favor. Ron, he said, dropping into the seat with the relief of the unrejected. Ron Weasley. His eyes went to Harry's forehead and snagged there the way everyone's did, and Hermione watched him have the decency to be embarrassed about it. Sorry, are you really? Yeah, said Harry with a flicker of the old flinch. He's really, said Hermione smoothly, taking it off Harry's plate, and he's also really tired of being a forehead, so we've got a rule in this compartment, which is that Harry is a person and not a scar, and anyone who can manage that gets sweets. She nodded at the doorway where the trolley witch had appeared with her laden cart, and the sweets are about to be considerable because Harry's rich and generous and I'm going to help him spend it. Mr. Weasley, what's good? You're clearly the local expert. Ron, who had been about to produce a squashed corned beef sandwich from a paper bag with the air of a boy resigning himself to it, brightened like a window with the sun coming through, and the corned beef went back in the bag, and the 3 of them buried the seat in chocolate frogs and pumpkin pasties and every flavor beans, and it was, Hermione thought, watching 2 boys argue happily about which Quidditch team was least embarrassing, exactly right. She had not planned to like doing this. She had planned to tolerate Ron as a strategic asset and a threat to the Weasleys. Instead, she sat in the warm chaos of it and let herself be, for a stretch of green countryside, just a first year on a train with 2 friends, and the wanting that ran underneath everything she did went quiet for a while and let her. It was Ron who unknowingly handed her the thread. This is Scabbers, he said gloomily, pulling a fat gray rat out of his pocket and dumping it on the seat where it lay in a doze with one ear chewed. He's useless. He was Percy's. He's about 100. He sleeps all day. Fred reckons he should have died years ago. He prodded it. Watch, I'll show you a spell my brother gave me supposed to turn him yellow. The rat slept on, fat and gray and ordinary, and Hermione looked at it, and the warmth went out of the afternoon like a tide going out. She knew that rat. She had shared a tent with that rat. She had eaten meals an arm's length from that rat in a future she carried like a stone, never once suspecting that the two-eared sleeper was a man, a murderer, the one who had sold Harry's parents to Voldemort, and let an innocent man rot in Azkaban for 12 years, and faked his own death with a finger and a street full of corpses. Peter Pettigrew was asleep on the seat between two children, fat and yellowing and missing a toe under the fur, and every instinct she had screamed to seize him now, to stun the rat and march it to the front of the train and have done. She did not move. Pettigrew exposed on a train would be Pettigrew vanished into the countryside. A rat is the easiest thing in the world to lose, and she had no way yet to make anyone believe what he was. She made herself smile at Ron and his hopeless pet. She made a clean note in the clean ledger: he's here, he's whole, he's in reach, and the moment I have a witness who matters and a wand to pin him, you're the first move I make, not yet, soon. You sold them and you've slept 12 years and you're going to wake up. He's got character, she said aloud of the rat and meant it as a sentence in two directions. Keep him close, Ron. You never know when an old rat'll turn out to matter. The castle came up out of the dark across the black mirror of the lake, 1,000 windows lit, the towers stacked impossibly against the stars. And the first years crossing the water in their little boats made the small odd sounds first years had made for 1,000 years. And Hermione, who had watched this same castle burn, sat in a boat with Harry's shoulder against hers and looked at it whole and lit and full of children, and let the sight of it unwhole something in her that she would put back together later, in private. Where it belonged, it's the best thing I've ever seen, Harry said very quietly. It is, she agreed, and did not add, keep it. Keep this exact picture of it lit and whole, because I am going to spend everything I have making sure it never looks any other way, and I have seen the other way, and you never will. The entrance hall, the stern witch in emerald with her hair in its tight bun, the weight, the doors, the 4 long tables and the floating candles, and the enchanted ceiling showing the same cold stars as outside. The sorting hat on its stool, splitting its brim to sing. Hermione had braced for the hat. The hat was the one thing in the whole castle she could not lie to, because the hat did not listen to your mouth. McGonagall read the names. A terrified boy went to Hufflepuff. Susan Bones to Hufflepuff. Granger, Hermione, and she walked up on legs she made steady and sat, and the brim came down over her eyes and shut out the hall. And a small, dry voice spoke inside her skull and then stopped. Oh, it said after a silence that lasted a heartbeat and contained 100 years. Oh, my dear, oh, you poor, terrible child. I'd ask you to keep it to yourself. Hermione thought back very clearly, the discipline she'd practiced on the train holding firm. Please. I have sorted children for 1,000 years, said the hat, and its voice had lost all its briskness, gone soft and strange and old, and I have looked into a great many minds, and I have never once looked into a mind that had already ended and started again. You have died, you remember dying, you remember all of it, the whole long war, every name. He is in here, the one without a face. You have his moves memorized the way other children memorize nursery rhymes. The hat seemed almost to shiver against her hair. And under all of it, holding it up like a beam holding up a burning house, there is one boy, and everything else in you is arranged around keeping him alive. You can't tell anyone, Hermione thought, not Dumbledore, not anyone, you're bound. I know you're bound, I've read it. What a sorting hat sees stays under the hat. I'm holding you to it. I am bound, the hat agreed, and I would hold my tongue even if I were not, because in 1,000 years, child, I have never seen courage like this, and I do not intend to spend it for you. The question is where to put you. The hat turned the question over, and she felt it look at her the way nothing had looked at her since she woke under the cornflowers, all the way through, with no part hidden. Your mind is the finest I have touched in a generation. Ravenclaw would worship you and learn from you and never once understand you. The serpents would arm you. You have the cunning for it now, you earned it the hard way, and the ambition, oh, the ambition, you want to rewrite the end of the world. But that is not where you belong, and you know it, and I will not insult you by pretending otherwise. Put me where he is, Hermione thought, wherever you put him. That's the only thing I'm asking. I didn't come back across the whole ruin of it to be 3 tables away from him. I rather thought you'd say that, said the hat, and there was something in its dry old voice that in a person would have been tenderness. Then you had better be, Gryffindor. It cried aloud to the hall, and the lion's table roared, and Hermione lifted the hat off and walked to the cheering on legs that knew the way, and she did not look back at the stool, and behind her, very quietly, where only she could hear, the hat said one last thing into the air she'd left: be careful, daughter of war. The kind old man at the high table is cleverer than you, and he loves Harry too, in his terrible, careful way, and that makes him the most dangerous thing in this hall. Mind him. She sat down at the Gryffindor table next to a delighted set of red-haired twins, 2 of them, both alive, and watched the rest of the sorting through eyes she had to keep blinking clear. Potter, Harry. The hall went still and then went loud with whispering, and Harry walked up the long aisle with every face turned to him, and Hermione sat forward because this was the one she could not script. The hat went down over his eyes. The hall held its breath. It took longer for Harry than for most, the hat muttering, Harry frowning under the brim, his lips moving once. She knew the shape of it from his telling long ago, the hat offering Slytherin, Harry refusing, but it ran differently now. Harry's head turned just slightly under the hat, and his blind face found the Gryffindor table, found her, the friend who had come to his park, and his chin came up with the particular stubbornness of a boy who has finally been given something he refuses to be parted from. Gryffindor. and the table came apart with cheering, and the twins bellowed, "We got Potter." Up and down the bench, and Harry half ran to the seat they'd saved beside Hermione and dropped into it grinning, and under the noise he said to her, breathless, "It wanted to put me somewhere else. Slytherin, I told it no. I told it I wanted to be where you were." He looked almost surprised at himself. "Was that stupid?" "It was the opposite of stupid," said Hermione, and bumped her shoulder against his, and did not trust her voice for anything longer. Ron joined them 10 minutes later, weak with relief, having followed his 5 brothers into the house he'd been terrified of failing, and Dumbledore rose at the high table to say a few mad words and warn them all, with a twinkle, away from a certain third-floor corridor on the right-hand side, unless they wished to die a very painful death. Hermione watched him over the golden plates. Long silver beard, half-moon spectacles, hands spread in benediction over a hall of children, and behind the twinkle a mind that had set a deadly obstacle course in a school full of 11-year-olds, and then dared them away from it in a tone calculated to make at least one brave child come looking. He was using the corridor as a hook. He was using all of it as a hook, and the bait, 2 seats down from her, was eating treacle tart and laughing at something a Weasley twin had said. Mind him, the hat had said, she intended to. The first weeks were reconnaissance dressed up as homework, and Hermione was very good at homework. She made herself the most visible kind of invisible, the swot in the front row, the girl who put her hand up for everything, because a child who is conspicuously ordinary in her ambition is a child nobody looks at twice for anything else. She let McGonagall be impressed and Flitwick be charmed and Snape be coldly unsurprised, and she banked all of it, because a reputation as a know-it-all was the perfect cover for a person who actually did know it all. Behind the cover she ran her campaign. She learned the patrol patterns of Filch and the moods of the staircases, which had not changed and would not, and she relearned the castle's secret arteries with the ease of a returning soldier walking her old lines. Harry she taught in the empty hours, in unused classrooms and the quiet end of the common room after the little ones had gone up, and Ron, who refused to be left out of anything that involved his 2 new friends and a closed door, learned alongside him, the 3 of them drilling charms and shielding and the small practical magics that the curriculum saved for 4th year, and Hermione saw no reason to wait on. She told them it was for fun. She told them it was a club. She did not tell them it was a war footing, because they were 11 and ought to have a club, and because a thing done for love and a thing done for war can be the same thing, done in the same room, with the same wand, and only the teacher need know which. There was a night near the end of September she would keep. The common room had emptied to the embers, and Harry stood in the middle of the rug with his wand up and his face screwed in concentration, and on the 4th attempt a shield bloomed off the tip of it, a faint silver dome that held when Ron, grinning, lobbed a cushion at it and the cushion bounced. Harry whooped, Ron whooped louder and threw 3 more. The shield held against all of them, wobbling, and Harry turned to her with the whole of his face lit, looking for her, as he always looked for her first when a thing went right, and she gave him the nod she knew he was hunting for and watched it land like a meal on a starving boy. "Did you see?" he demanded. "Hermione, did you see it hold?" "I saw," she said. "3rd year charm, 2nd week of 1st year. You're going to be frightening, you know that, properly frightening, in the good way." Ron flopped onto the hearthrug, breathless and pink. "My brothers'll never believe it. 1st year's doing shields. Bill couldn't do a pratigo till he was 14, he says, and he's a curse breaker." He squinted up at her with the open Weasley friendliness that asked nothing and gave everything. "How do you know all this stuff, Hermione? Honest, you're 11. You talk like somebody's nan who fought in a war." She laughed because it was safest to laugh, and because the alternative was to sit down on the hearthrug between these 2 living boys and weep. "I read somebody's nan's books," she said. "Now do it again, Harry. 11 more times. Boring is the point. Boring is how you stay alive." She made them drill until the fire was ash, and she sat in the warm dark afterwards while they argued sleepily about Quidditch. 2 boys she had buried once and would not bury again, and she let the rightness of it sit in her chest where the grief usually lived, just for an hour, before she sent them up to bed and went back to the war. And on a Saturday in October, while Ron and Harry were down at the pitch watching the Gryffindor team train and arguing about Quidditch, Hermione climbed alone to the 7th floor, to a stretch of blank wall opposite a tapestry of a man teaching trolls to dance, and walked past it 3 times with a single thought held hard and clear in her mind. "I need the place where everything is hidden." A door grew out of the wall. She had been here before in the last terrible year, and she stepped into the room of hidden things knowing exactly what it was, a cathedral of lost and forbidden objects piled into canyons under a high-vaulted dark, the cast-offs of 1,000 years of children, broken furniture and forgotten contraband, and the relics of every secret the castle had ever swallowed. Dust hung in the still air and caught the light from nowhere. She did not let the size of it slow her. She had memorized the route to a grave she visited often. Down the third aisle, left at the cabinet that looked like a coffin standing on end, past the stuffed troll in the rusting suits of armor to a particular blistered old cupboard, and on top of it, exactly where it had sat undisturbed for 50 years, on the chipped bust of an ugly old warlock under a moth-eaten wig and a tarnished tiara that some long-ago girl had stolen and abandoned, a diadem. Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem. Black with age, the dark blue stones gone dull, the inscription worn but legible, wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure. A thing of terrible beauty and terrible wrongness, and even from arm's length she could feel the cold coming off it, the small sucking absence at the center of it, the wrongness of a soul cut into pieces and shoved into objects that were never meant to hold a soul at all. She did not touch it with her hands. She had brought a folded square of cloth and a pair of tongs filched from the potion stores, and she lifted the diadem free of the bust with the tongs and wrapped it without letting her skin near it, because she did not know what 50 years of patience had taught the fragment of Tom Riddle inside it, and she was not in the habit of taking chances with the most dangerous objects in the world. The cold of it came through the cloth. She felt it try faintly to be interesting, to be wanted, whispering at the edge of attention about cleverness and recognition and all the things a friendless, brilliant child might hunger for. She had hungered for exactly those things once. She knew the shape of the bait precisely, which was why it slid off her now. Not today, she told it, wrapping it tighter. I can't end you yet. I don't have the venom yet. But you're off the board, you're out of his reach, and when I come back for you I'll have a basilisk's tooth in my hand, and you will be the first of his anchors I burn. She carried it out of the room in her bag, swaddled and silent, one piece of a murdered man's soul, the easiest of all of them, taken without a fight from a place no one else knew to look. And she walked down through the castle past laughing children and floating candles with a horcrux on her shoulder and her face perfectly calm. And she hid it that night behind a loose stone in a disused dungeon she had chosen weeks before, warded with every concealment a first year could plausibly not know, and she knew anyway. One down, or as good as the first piece of him, gathering dust where he had been so sure no one would ever think to look. She slept well that night, better than she had since the cornflowers. The diadem was the easy one. Quirrell was the one that needed nerve, and she gave herself until Halloween to find it. She studied him as she had studied everything from the front row, the model student watching her stammering defense teacher with apparent sympathy and total attention. She catalogued the tremor in his hands and the smell of garlic he wore to explain the smell underneath, and his eyes that never quite settled, and that twice, when she passed close behind him in a corridor, the back of his turbaned head seemed to lean fractionally toward her, the parasite inside it tasting the air. She did not let it frighten her into stillness. A predator that knows you have noticed it grows cautious. A predator that thinks your prey grows careless, and a careless enemy is a gift. She built her plan out of 3 facts she held and he did not know she held. Fact 1, he could not get the stone. It sat in the deepest chamber behind the mirror of Arist, and Dumbledore's enchantment would surrender it only to a person who wanted to find the stone without using it, and Quirrell wanted to use it more than he had ever wanted anything, and so the mirror would show him his desire and never hand it over. He could stand in front of that mirror until he starved. The stone was already safe. Nobody else seemed to understand that, which meant the danger had never really been the theft. The danger was the year of patience, the slow rot of a parasite living in the school's walls, learning, waiting, finding another road. She did not intend to grant him the year. Fact 2, Harry's skin was a weapon. The thing his mother had done to him was still there in him under the surface, and it burned the parasite on contact, and in a future that would now never happen it had saved Harry's life in this very chamber by reducing Quirrell's hands to blistered ash. It had happened by accident then, 2 terrified people grappling in the dark. It need not be an accident. A weapon you understand is a weapon you can aim. Fact 3, Dumbledore could be made to be in the castle. In the version she remembered, Quirrell had moved on a night the headmaster was lured to London by a forged summons, leaving 3 children alone against a possessed man and a hidden dark lord. She could not stop a forgery she would not see coming, but she could choose her own night, before Quirrell was ready, before any summons was prepared. On an evening she had confirmed the headmaster was sitting at his own high table eating his own dinner. If the thing moved on her schedule, the headmaster would still be upstairs when the alarm went up, so she gave Quirrell his urgency. It was almost too easy. She did it in the library, where Quirrell sometimes lurked among the restricted shelves, by sitting at a nearby table with Harry and conducting. In a carrying undertone, she pitched precisely for the back of a turban 3 shelves away, a worried conversation about something she'd supposedly overheard a prefect say. That Professor Dumbledore had had a letter from a man named Flamel, and that the dangerous object everyone whispered was hidden in the school was to be taken away and destroyed at the end of the week, because keeping it here had become too great a risk. She let Harry play his unwitting part simply by being himself, asking real questions she answered with invented certainty. She did not look at the shelves once. She did not need to. She heard the small, stilled silence behind them, the sound a frightened thing makes when it learns its window is closing, That night, 2 days before he could possibly have been ready, Quirinus Quirrell went to the third-floor corridor. She had been watching for it. She had spent a week of evenings on a transfigured perch near the corridor's end under a borrowed look-away charm, and when the stammering man came up the stairs without his stammer, walking smooth and quick and wrong, she sent her message the way she'd arranged it. Not a shout, not a child's cry that staff would dismiss, but a charmed paper bird she'd keyed to a single name, launched from her sleeve to fly straight and fast to the high table and land in front of Albus Dumbledore with 4 words on its wing in her neatest hand. QRRELL, third floor. Now. Then she went after Quirrell because the failsafe had to be in the room, and the failsafe was a boy she had armed, and she had promised him he would never do the frightening thing alone. Harry was already at the corridor's mouth when she got there, because of course he was, because she had told him everything that afternoon, the whole shape of the night, and asked him whether he wanted to come or wait, and a boy who had spent his life being kept in cupboards while things were decided about him had looked at her, and said, "I'm not waiting upstairs while you do this, not ever, we do it together or not at all," and she had loved him so fiercely in that moment that it had frightened her. The dog was no trouble. She'd brought the flute, and Fluffy's 3 great heads sagged into snores within a minute of her playing, and the trapdoor stood open where Quirrell had already gone down. The devil's snare she defeated with a word and a wash of blue flame before it had finished reaching for them. The flying keys she ignored entirely, because Quirrell had left the door beneath them unlocked behind him, the carelessness of a man in a hurry. The chessboard she did not play. She had Harry climb the edge of the hall along the wall while the giant pieces stood frozen mid-game where Quirrell had simply blasted his way through, and she filed away that the wraith's impatience was making it sloppy, which was useful, which she would remember. The troll was already down and stinking. The potions riddle she solved from memory before Harry had finished reading it, the smallest black bottle, 2 swallows each, and she made him take his share and took hers and felt the ice of it run down into her chest, and then there was only the last door, and beyond it the chamber and the mirror and the thing in the turban. "Whatever happens," she said to Harry low in the half-second before the door, "you remember the one thing, if it comes to his hands on you, you don't pull away, you hold on. Skin to skin, it can't bear your skin, Harry, I promise you on Hedwig, it will burn him and not you, and you hold on until it lets go or until help comes, and help is coming, I sent for it before I came down. Can you hold on?" "I can hold on," Harry said, white to the lips and steady as a stone, and she opened the door. Quirrell stood before the mirror of Arist with his turban unwound and his back to them. In the back of his head was a face. A terrible flat gray face with red eyes and slits for nostrils, and the chamber was very cold, the kind of cold she remembered from graveyards and tents in winter and the inside of her own chest at the worst moment of her first life. And the red eyes found the 2 children in the doorway, and the lipless mouth said, in a voice like wind over the necks of bottles, "Potter." And the friend, the clever little friend who has been so very busy, the thing that had been Quirrell turned, and the front of him was a wasted ruin, and the back of him watched them with its red eyes the whole time. "Why yes, I have felt you, girl, all autumn, snapping at my heels. I could not see you. Master, this is the one who has been moving the pieces. I see her," said the cold high voice from the wraith's own mouth, doubled now, 2 voices in one ravaged throat, and the red eyes fixed on Hermione with an attention that had murdered the world once already, and for one heartbeat she was 11 and she was 30 and she was nothing at all, falling into those eyes. "I see you, child, you look at me like no child looks at me. You look at me like a soldier looks at ground she has lost before." The mouth moved into something hideous. "What are you?" "I'm the last page of your book," said Hermione, and her voice did not shake, the steadiness that had read names at a memorial holding firm in the cold, "and you're not going to like how it ends. Kill them." What happened then happened fast, and she had drilled it into the bones of both of them so it would happen without thinking. Quirrell lunged, the wand coming up, and Harry did not run from him and did not freeze. Harry went at him, as she had taught him, inside the arc of the wand, and got both hands on the wasted wrist, skin to skin, and held on. Quirrell screamed. Where Harry's fingers touched, the flesh blistered and blackened and crumbled to gray ash, and Quirrell wrenched and shrieked and could not pull free because Harry held on, white and grim and weeping with the effort and holding on as she'd asked, and the chamber filled with the smell of it and the wraith's double scream and the red eyes rolling, and Hermione did not waste the moment watching. She had her own work. She had her wand up and a binding already pouring out of it, ropes of light wrapping the disintegrating body so the thing inside could not simply abandon it and flee while she had it pinned, holding the dying vessel shut around its passenger as you cap a bottle before the wasp can climb out. "Hold him, Harry," and then the door behind them blew off its hinges in a wash of white fire and the cold broke like a fever breaking, and Albus Dumbledore was in the chamber and he was not twinkling. She had never seen him like this, not in either life. The kind old grandfather was simply gone, peeled away, and what stood in the doorway was the wizard who had once beaten Grindelwald, ancient and terrible and moving very fast. and a streak of crimson and gold came with him through the broken door and circled the chamber once shrieking, and Fawkes the Phoenix dove at the thing tearing itself free of Quirrell's crumbling body, and Dumbledore's wand carved a shape in the air that Hermione had only ever read about, and the wraith. The shard of soul that had been Lord Voldemort was ripped screaming out of the ash and the bindings both and flung against the far wall and pinned there, writhing, a thing of black smoke and red eyes and pure refusing hatred, held by the headmaster's will, and the phoenix's song while Quirrell's empty body folded down into a heap of ashen robes. It could not stay. She knew it could not be destroyed this way, not while it still had its anchors out in the world, the diadem in her dungeon and the ring in the shack and the locket in London and the cup in the vault and the worst one standing 3 feet from her with his hands still burning. She knew the wraith would tear free and flee east into the trees and the long patience of Albania, but she saw what her schedule had bought. She had taken its body in October instead of June. She had denied it the year. She had made it spend itself early and flee weak with nothing gained, and she had done it without losing a single hour of Harry's life to it, and the headmaster of the school had been in the room to see the wraith for what it was, which meant that for the first time the right people knew, all the way at the top, that the Dark Lord was not gone, that he was crawling, that the war was not over. The smoke screamed one last time and tore loose and shot through the broken door and away gone, fled into the dark with the phoenix's song chasing it out, and the cold went out of the chamber all at once, and the only sounds were Quirrell's robes settling into their ash and Harry's ragged breathing and a boy's quiet weeping that Hermione crossed the floor to gather up into her arms without a single thought about strategy. I held on, Harry said into her shoulder, shaking. You said hold on, and I held on. You did, she said, holding him, her hand on the back of his head, and over his shoulder she met the eyes of Albus Dumbledore across a chamber full of ash and broken enchantment, and the eyes that looked back at her were not unkind and were not fooled, and the half-moon spectacles caught the light of the dying fire, and she understood that the easy part of the year was over and the dangerous part had just walked in through the broken door. They came to him 3 days later in his office because he asked, and one did not refuse the headmaster, and Hermione went up the moving spiral stair with Harry beside her, and the whole speech she would give already built and load-tested in her mind. Dumbledore's office was a clutter of silver instruments that whirred and puffed, and Fawkes drowsed on a golden perch, and the headmaster sat behind his desk with his fingertips together, and his blue eyes miled over the half-moons, and he offered them sherbet lemons, and he asked them gently how 2 first-year students had come to know that Professor Quirrell would go to the 3rd-floor corridor on that particular night, and how a boy of 11 had known to hold on rather than flee, and how a girl of 11 had known to send for him with a charmed bird before the alarm could be raised any other way. I read a lot, said Hermione, which was the foundation of everything she would build. I've read every book in the restricted section that Madame Pince would let an annoying child near, and a few she wouldn't. I worked out what was behind the corridor from the obstacles, sir, because each professor's obstacle is in the style of the professor who said it, and you can read a school like a book if you read enough books. I worked out Quirrell because he smelled wrong and his stammer slipped when he thought no one was listening, and his eyes went to the 3rd floor every single meal. And I worked out the rest by being frightened for my friend and refusing to be stupid about it. She held his gaze, the calm front of her face perfectly arranged, the door at the back of her mind shut and bolted. I know it sounds like a great deal for a first year, sir. I've been told that my whole life. I just notice things and I think about them and I love my friend and I wasn't going to wait politely for an adult to notice the one trying to murder him. With respect, sir, waiting for adults to notice is how children get hurt. It was a good speech. It was even mostly true, which was the secret of a good speech, and she watched it land on Albus Dumbledore and she watched him decline very gently to believe the whole of it. A remarkable account, he said, and the twinkle was there and the steel was under it, and the two of them looked at each other across the desk and each understood that the other was performing. You are a remarkable young woman, Miss Granger. I have taught a very long time and I have learned to be grateful for remarkable students and to watch them rather closely for their own protection. He smiled, all grandfather. It is a dangerous thing to notice as much as you notice and to love as fiercely as you so clearly love, dangerous and precious both. I hope you will come to me in time with the things you notice. I am, after all, on your side and on Harry's. The blue eyes moved to Harry and softened, and there was real feeling in them, which was the part that made him dangerous because it was not an act. He did love Harry in his terrible, patient way, like a smith who loves the blade he has forged for a purpose. We are all on the same side here. I'm sure we are, sir, said Hermione, and smiled back and took a sherbet lemon to be polite and thought behind the smile, behind the bolted door. We are not on the same side, old man, not quite, not where it matters most. You love him and you mean to spend him. I love him and I mean to keep him. One of us has read the last page, and it isn't you. She thanked him for the sweets, and she took Harry's hand, and she walked him out of the office and down the moving stair into the ordinary noise of the castle, One threat burned to ash behind them, and a far worse one fled weak into the trees, and a kind, terrible old man at the top of a tower beginning at last to take her seriously. Good, she thought, going down, let him. A man watching me is a man I can show exactly what I choose, and I have so very much left to do. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. Hunting shadows. With the parasite burned out of the castle and fled weak into the east, Hermione turned her attention to the living, and the first of the living she meant to save was a man rotting in a fortress in the sea for a murder he had not committed. She had been carrying Sirius Black around in her chest since the train, since the fat gray rat had rolled over in Ron's palm and shown her the chewed ear and the missing toe. The arithmetic of him was simple, and it had teeth. Sirius Black sat in Azkaban because the wizarding world believed he had betrayed the Potters and then blown apart a street full of muggles and Peter Pettigrew along with it. Every part of that was a lie Pettigrew had built, the betrayal and the murder both, and the proof of the lie slept all day in a Gryffindor boy's pocket and ate toast crumbs and was, as far as the world knew, dead. She had the proof. She had had it within reach for months. What she had lacked until Quirrell was a reason for anyone in authority to listen to an 11-year-old, and what she had gained, in a chamber full of ash with the headmaster watching her hold a Dark Lord pinned, was exactly that. So she built the case as she built everything in layers, so that by the time she sprang it there would be no single thread anyone could cut. She started with Harry because Harry deserved to be told first, and because she would not move a piece this large without his hand on it beside hers. She took him up to their disused dungeon on a wet Sunday, the one where the diadem sat behind its loose stone, and she sat him down on an upturned crate and she told him, gently and completely, the part of his own history that no one had ever told him, that he had a godfather. That his parents had named a man to raise him if they died, a man who had loved them, who had been best man at their wedding, who had held Harry as a baby. That he was alive, that he was in prison, that he was innocent. She watched it move across his face, the careful disbelief of a child who has learned that good news is a trap. If I had a godfather, Harry said low, if I had somebody who was supposed to take me, then why was I in the cupboard? Why did nobody ever come? Because the one who really betrayed your parents framed him for it, said Hermione, and let him be thrown into the worst place in the world without a trial, and then hid, for 10 years, as a rat. She let that sit. Sirius Black has spent a decade in a cell believing it was partly his fault, because he trusted the wrong friend and talked your parents into trusting him too. He's innocent of the murders and guilty only of being fooled, which is a thing that has happened to better people than him, and he's going to walk out of that prison, Harry, this year, because you and I are going to walk him out. And then you're going to have somewhere to go that isn't a cupboard. That's the plan. That's been the plan since the train. I just had to wait until they'd believe us. Harry was quiet for a long moment, turning his wand over in his hands as he did when something was too big to hold all at once. The rat, he said slowly. You mean Scabbers. You've been weird about Scabbers since the train. I thought it was just you being you. His head came up. Ron's rat is the one who killed my parents. Ron's rat is the one who sold your parents, Hermione corrected, because precision mattered and because Harry deserved the precise truth. Voldemort cast the curse, but yes. Peter Pettigrew has been sleeping in your best friend's dormitory all year, and the only reason I haven't pulled him out by the tail is that a rat is the easiest thing in the world to lose, and I needed witnesses who matter in the room when I do it, or he simply vanishes into the walls and Sirius dies in that cell. So, she took a breath, we do it carefully, we do it once. And we do not tell Ron yet because Ron loves that rat and Ron's face cannot keep a secret to save its life, and if Pettigrew sees it coming he runs. Ron's going to be upset he wasn't told, Harry said, with the loyalty that was the best thing in him. Ron's going to be upset for about an hour, said Hermione, and then he's going to find out he's been sharing a bed with a war criminal for a year and that we caught him and that we did it to free your godfather, and Ron Weasley is going to decide correctly that it was worth 1 hour of being cross. I know him, trust me on the shape of him. She softened. We'll tell him the moment before, so he's there, so it's the three of us. It should be the three of us. She built the trap out of 2 simple needs Pettigrew could not resist, warmth and food. It took a week of preparation she disguised as nothing at all. She brewed in the dungeon a thin clear potion she had no business knowing at 12, a draught that would force an animagus out of his animal shape and hold him there, hers improved from a version Remus Lupin would have taught a frightened trio in a shrieking shack years from now. In a future she was unspooling thread by thread. She wrote 3 letters, one to Professor McGonagall, one to the headmaster, and one, the most carefully composed thing she had written in 2 lifetimes, to Madame Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, a woman she remembered as fair and unbribable and one of the few in the ministry who could not be made to look away. She did not send them yet. She set them aside, addressed and sealed the springs of the trap. And on a Saturday morning in the last week of May, with the exams done and the castle drowsy in early summer, she gathered the people who mattered. It was not difficult to get them. A note to McGonagall in her careful hand. Professor, I have proof that an innocent man is in Azkaban and a guilty one is hiding in this school. I need you, the headmaster, and someone from law enforcement in your office this morning. I would not ask if I were not certain. It is about Sirius Black." McGonagall came down the corridor herself within the hour, white about the mouth, and looked at Hermione and looked at the sealed letter to Amelia Bones in Hermione's hand, and said only, "You had better not be wrong, Miss Granger," and Hermione said, "I have never in my life been more right," and meant it with the weight of 2 lifetimes behind it. They assembled in McGonagall's office, the stern witch, the headmaster with his blue eyes very steady, and an hour later by emergency flew because Dumbledore had made one quiet call that even a Hermione could not have made. Amelia Bones herself, square-jawed and monocled, and radiating the impatience of a woman pulled from real work. Ron was there, baffled and clutching a squirming Scabbers, because Hermione had told him only that morning, "The bare minimum, your rat is not a rat and I'm sorry and please just hold him and don't let go," and Ron, to his eternal credit, had gone pale and held on, and Harry stood beside her where he belonged. "Miss Granger," said Amelia Bones, "I am told you have something to say about the most notorious prisoner in Britain. I am a busy woman, say it." "Sirius Black never betrayed the Potters and never killed Peter Pettigrew," Hermione said, into the quiet, in the clear carrying voice she had practiced. "Peter Pettigrew was the Potters' secret keeper, not Sirius Black. Pettigrew betrayed them to Voldemort, and when Sirius cornered him in that street, Pettigrew shouted his accusation for the Muggles to hear, blew the street apart with a curse behind his back, cut off his own finger and transformed into a rat and fled into the sewers, leaving Sirius laughing at the joke of it because shock and horror had broken him and there was nothing left to do but laugh. There was never a trial, no one checked. And Peter Pettigrew has spent the last 12 years living as a family pet." She turned and pointed, and her hand did not shake. "That rat, in Ron Weasley's hands, is Peter Pettigrew, and I can prove it in front of all of you right now." "That," said Amelia Bones, "is the single most outlandish." "Then watch," said Hermione, and raised her wand. The spell came out of her clean and certain, the force shift she had brewed and learned and held ready, and it struck the rat squirming in Ron's grip, and Ron yelped and let go, and the rat hit the floor and began, horribly, to grow. Limbs lengthened, the gray fur thinned and became a balding scalp. A snout flattened into a pointed, sallow, rat-like human face with small, wet, watery eyes, and in 3 seconds where a rat had been there crouched a small, grubby, trembling man in filthy rags, missing a finger on one hand, blinking in the light, cornered, caught, 12 years out of his hole at last. "Peter," breathed McGonagall, the color gone out of her entirely. "Peter Pettigrew." "Hello, Peter," said Hermione very quietly, and she did not smile because there was nothing to smile about, only a souled family and a stolen decade and a man who had let an innocent friend rot, and she held her wand steady on him while Amelia Bones, no longer impatient, no longer anything but iron, drew her own. "You've slept rather a long time. It's over now." Pettigrew did what Pettigrew always did. He looked for the kindest face in the room and threw himself at its feet, and the kindest face was Harry's, and he scrabbled across the floor whimpering, "Harry, Harry, you look just like James. James would have wanted you to show mercy. Your father was kind, Harry, your mother, don't," said Harry, and his voice cut the air like a dropped blade, and Pettigrew stopped because there was something in this 12-year-old's voice that was older than 12. "Don't you say their names. You don't get their names. You sold them. You're going to say exactly what you did to her." He tipped his head at Amelia Bones and her bottle of truth potion, "and then you're going to go to prison and my godfather is going to come home." He looked at Hermione, then only at her, and what was in his face was too large for the room. "She found me in a park," he said to no one and to everyone, "and she's been carrying this for me the whole time, so you'll forgive me if I'm not in a forgiving mood." Amelia Bones looked at the trembling man on her floor, and then she looked for a long, recalibrating moment at the bushy-haired 12-year-old who had just handed her the unraveling of the most infamous case of the decade, tied up with a witness and a method and a motive, and something in the square, unbribable face shifted into a wary, dawning respect. "Veritaserum," she said to her aide, not taking her eyes off Hermione. "Now, and somebody send a fast owl to wake up the Wisengamot." "It seems," she said, "we have an innocent man to bring home." The Veritaserum did the rest, because the truth, poured neat down a coward's throat, is the most damning thing in the world. Pettigrew told them all of it in a flat, drugged whisper, the secret keeper's switch, the betrayal, the street, the finger, the 12 years in the gutter, and a scribe took every word, and Amelia Bones's mouth went thinner with each sentence, and Ron stood against the wall with his hand pressed over it and watched the pet he'd fed for years confess to murder. When it was done, they took Pettigrew away in chains, and Bones made the calls that only a department head could make, and the machinery of a state that had wronged a man for a decade began, grudgingly, to reverse. It took 9 days. 9 days of Wisengamot sittings and overturned verdicts, and a daily prophet that printed black innocent in letters 4 inches high above a photograph of Sirius, as he had been before the fortress took him, laughing, young, his arm around a couple Hermione recognized with a lurch as Harry's parents. 9 days, and on the 10th, on a bright cold morning, a boat crossed the grey water from Azkaban carrying a free man, and Hermione stood on the dock at the edge of the world with Harry's hand crushing hers and watched Sirius Black come home. He was a ruin. She had braced for it and braced wrong. The handsome laughing man of the photograph was somewhere far down inside the gaunt grey scarecrow that came up the dock on unsteady legs, hollow-cheeked, his eyes too large and too bright in a face that had forgotten the sun, his hands shaking with the simple, unmanageable freedom of the open air. 12 years of Dementors had eaten him down to the studs, and then he saw Harry. Hermione would remember the sound he made for the rest of her life, both her lives, a sound with no dignity in it and no words, the sound of a man who has had everything taken, finding one piece of it given back. He came down the dock at a stagger, and Harry let go of her hand and ran, and the two of them collided and went down to their knees on the wet planks together, the broken godfather and the child who looked just like James, and Sirius held Harry's face in his shaking hands and said his name over and over, "Harry, Harry, oh God, Harry, look at you," and Harry, who flinched at sudden movement, who had spent his life being touched only to be struck, held on to the stranger who was his godfather and did not flinch at all. Hermione stood back and let them have it. This was not her moment. She had built the machine that produced this moment, and the moment itself belonged to the two of them, and she would not stand in it. She watched a family that should never have been broken begin, badly and tearfully and on its knees on a wet dock, to mend, and she let the salt wind take the heat out of her own face, and she did not let herself think about an archway and a veil and a careless laugh and a body that fell backward through the world and did not come out the other side. Not that, not here. He's alive, he's on the dock. The veil is a thing that will now never happen. Look at him alive and let the rest go. It was Sirius who came to her after, when Harry had been pried temporarily loose and bundled into a blanket by a fussing ministry healer. He came across the dock on his unsteady legs and stood in front of the bushy-haired girl who had set him free, and he looked at her for a long time out of those two bright eyes, and what he said was not thank you, though the thank you was all over his ruined face. "You're not a normal 12-year-old, Sirius Black said. His voice was a rasp unused for talking, used only for screaming in the dark. "I've been around a long time in a lot of bad rooms with a lot of clever people. I know what it looks like when someone's carrying more than they're saying. You've got a soldier's eyes, girl, and a child's face. I don't know what that means, and I don't think you'll tell me." He swayed and steadied. "But you gave me back the only thing I had left, so whatever you are, whatever you're carrying, you don't carry it alone anymore. You hear me? James and Lily made me Harry's godfather. I'm extending the franchise. You're mine now too, both of you. That's how this works." Hermione, who had not wept on the dock for Sirius alive when she had wept rivers for Sirius dead, found that this was the thing that undid her, this broken man offering to share a weight he couldn't begin to imagine, and she stepped forward and put her arms around him, careful of how thin he was, and held on, and let one sob out into his prison-stinking robes before she put the rest away. "Need feeding up," she said, muffled, recovering, because practicality was how her mother loved and she had learned it well. "And a healer who knows Dementor damage. There's a potion regimen, I'll write it down. And Harry's coming to live with you, and you're not remotely well enough to look after a child yet, so you're both going to spend the summer with my family in Hampstead while you mend, where there are dentists and a garden, and my mother will not let either of you leave a meal unfinished. Those are the terms. My dad invented the terms. We're a family that does terms." Sirius Black laughed, and it was a wreck of a laugh, rusty and astonished, but it was a real one, the first since the fortress, and Hermione marked it as she marked everything, and added it to the small, growing ledger of things she had put back into the world that the world had tried to take. The summer in Hampstead was the best of Hermione's two lives, and she knew it while it was happening, which is the rarest way to have a good time. Sirius mended slowly in the Grangers' spare room in their sunny garden, under her mother's relentless feeding and her father's terrible jokes and the steady ordinary safety of a house where nothing was allowed to hurt anyone. He put on weight. The light came back into his eyes by degrees. He and Harry were inseparable, two halves of a thing that had been broken and was knitting, and to watch them was to watch Harry change in real time, the flinch leaving him, the wariness thinning, a boy learning week by sunny week that he was wanted by blood and not only by choice. Hermione's parents, who had set out a year ago to find one lonely child a friend, now had a houseful, a recovering convict and a famous orphan and their own extraordinary daughter, and her father said one evening, watching the three young people sprawled on the lawn in the long light, that he had wanted a bigger family for years and had simply gone about acquiring one in an unusual order, and her mother had laughed and not disagreed. And Hermione worked because the war did not take summers off, and because pieces of a murderer's soul still sat out in the world, and the wraith that had fled the chamber was somewhere in the east, gathering itself, learning of its servant's exposure, beginning to be afraid. She did not tell Sirius the whole of it. She told him a curated portion, the portion a freed godfather could act on, that Voldemort was not gone, that he had left dark objects hidden in the world that anchored him to life, that she knew where some of them were, and that she meant to destroy them before he could come back to use them. She told him because she needed an adult with a wand and a house, and because Sirius Black, of all the adults alive, was the one least likely to insist on going to Dumbledore, given what Dumbledore's silence had cost him. He listened to her with those two bright eyes, and when she had finished he was quiet for a while, and then he said, "The locket," and she went still. "You know about the locket," she said. "Regulus," said Sirius, and the name was a wound. "My brother, he died when I was." He turned at the end, he turned against the whole thing, and nobody ever knew why, and there's a locket in my mother's filthy house in London that my brother died over and that our mad old house elf won't let anyone throw away. Creature keeps trying to destroy it and weeping that he can't. He looked at her. "That's one of them, isn't it? That's one of your dark objects." "It's one of them," said Hermione softly, and something moved across the godfather's face, raw and new, for a brother he'd hated and lost and was only now learning had been braver than anyone knew. Regulus stole it from Voldemort and died trying to make sure it could be destroyed. He left instructions for Creature that Creature couldn't carry out. "We can carry them out, Sirius. We can finish what your brother started. We just need a thing I don't have yet, a particular kind of venom, and I know where to get it, and at the start of next term I'm going to." "Then we go to Grimmauld Place," said Sirius, "and we get the locket, and we tell Creature his master Regulus would be proud, because the poor mad Creature has waited 18 years to hear it." He scrubbed a hand over his face. "God, you really do carry a great deal, don't you?" "I'm carrying less every week," said Hermione, and found to her surprise that it was true. The diary came to her in a crowded bookshop, exactly where and when she had known it would, and she took it out of the world before the world ever knew it had been in it. They went to Diagon Alley in the second week of August for their second-year supplies, the whole strange household of them, and Flourish and Blots was a crush because a preening fraud named Gilderoy Lockhart was signing his memoirs, and in the crush, just as the ledger of her first life had promised, the Weasleys arrived in their cheerful red-haired flood, and a tall, pale man with a silver-headed cane arrived behind them wearing his contempt-like cologne. Lucius Malfoy. Hermione had positioned herself near the second-hand cauldrons before he ever came through the door, because she knew the choreography of the scene to the step, and she watched him pick a quarrel with Arthur Weasley, watched the two men grapple and shout among the falling books, and watched, in the chaos of it, Lucius Malfoy's gloved hand dip into the battered cauldron of the smallest red-haired child and slip a slim black book in among her second-hand spellbooks, smooth and practiced, a snake leaving an egg. Ginny Weasley never felt it, and Hermione, 3 feet away under the cover of the brawl, with a silent summoning already shaped in her mind, drew the black diary back out of the cauldron and into her own waiting bag in the same instant, so that the thing Lucius Malfoy believed he had planted was already gone before he had finished straightening his robes. He left the shop convinced his long, patient scheme was in motion. He had handed a Horcrux with his own hand to the one person in Britain hunting them. She did not gloat. She had learned that gloating was for people who weren't sure they'd won. She simply closed her bag on the cold, small weight of it, one more anchor off the board, and turned her attention to the second piece of business, which had white blonde hair and large, frightened eyes and was, at this moment, peering at Harry from behind a shelf with its tennis-ball gaze full of doom. Dobby. The little elf had been trying all summer in her first life to save Harry by ruining his life and had very nearly killed him with misplaced devotion. This time Hermione simply walked over to the shelf, crouched down to the elf's level in the middle of the bookshop and said gently, "Hello, Dobby. You've been trying to warn Harry about a diary in a chamber, haven't you? You don't have to. We already know. We've already stopped it. You can rest." And the elf's enormous eyes filled and his lip trembled, and Hermione, who had buried this small brave creature once with a silver blade in his chest and her own scream in her throat, had to look at the floor of the bookshop for a moment before she could go on. "How would you like to be free, Dobby, properly free today?" It took a sock and a sleight of hand and the predictable cruelty of Lucius Malfoy, who could no more resist an insult than he could resist a mirror. Hermione had tucked one of Harry's socks into an old battered diary, a decoy, a thing of no value dressed up to look like the thing Lucius thought he'd lost, and on the steps of the shop when Lucius came stalking out, Harry stepped up and pressed the bundle into his hands. "I think you dropped this, sir," Harry said, all innocence, and Sirius Black stood at his shoulder, a free and pardoned man, watching his old schoolyard enemy with a wolf's bright patience, and Lucius Malfoy, unable to bear being handed anything by a Potter in front of a Black, flung the bundle down the steps with a sneer, and the old diary skidded away, and the sock fell out of it, and Dobby snatched the sock from the air. "Master has given Dobby a sock," the elf whispered, holding it up in both shaking hands. "Master has given Dobby clothes. Dobby is free." Lucius Malfoy's face was a thing to behold. He understood too late that he had been worked, and he raised his cane and his wand half came out of it, and Dobby threw out one small hand, and a blast of pure elf magic flung Lucius backward down the steps onto his expensive behind in front of half of magical Britain, and Sirius laughed his wrecked laugh, and that was the end of that. Lucius did not know his real diary was gone. He only knew he'd lost his elf and his dignity on the same morning, and he gathered both around him and swept away, and Dobby attached himself to Harry and Hermione on the spot with a devotion that would, before the end of all this, take him into a goblin bank and out again with the last anchor in the world. Number 12, Grimmauld Place unfolded itself out of nothing between two ordinary London houses, and the smell of it came out to meet them on the step, dust and damp and old dark magic gone sour, the smell of a house that has been hating quietly to itself for a long time. Sirius stood on the threshold of his childhood home, and for a moment the freed man went away and a frightened boy stood in his place, and Hermione put her hand on his arm and did not say anything, because some doors you have to walk through yourself. Then he squared his thin shoulders and went in, and the portrait of his mother woke screaming filth from the wall, and Sirius told her, with a savage joy that was the healthiest thing Hermione had heard out of him yet, exactly where she could put her opinions, and they went down into the kitchen to find the elf. Creature was a wretched, wrinkled, muttering thing, more bitterness than elf, and he hated Sirius on sight and said so, and Hermione let the hatred wash past her because she knew its source, knew that under it was a creature who had loved one master with his whole small, fierce heart and watched that master walk into a cave and never come home, and had been failing alone for 18 years to finish the one task that master had set him. She crouched down on the filthy flagstones in front of him as she had crouched in front of Dobby, and she said the name that mattered. Regulus, she said, creature, we came about Master Regulus's locket. The elf went utterly still. His great bloodshot eyes came up to her face, and his lip began to tremble, and a low keening built in his chest, because no one in 18 years had said that name to him as anything but an accusation. Creature could not destroy it, he whispered, wringing his hands, rocking. Master Regulus told Creature to destroy it, and Creature tried everything, and it would not break, and Creature failed his master, Creature failed. You didn't fail him, Hermione said, and she said it gently, and she said it with the certainty of a person who had read the end of the story. Listen to me. The thing your master gave you cannot be destroyed by any magic an elf has, or a wizard either, except one rare thing that I am going to bring to it. You didn't fail. You guarded it for 18 years, exactly as he asked, until someone came who could finish it. That is the opposite of failing, creature. That is keeping faith longer than anyone could ask. Your master Regulus turned against the Dark Lord to save the whole world from him, and he died doing it, and he was the bravest of all of them, and he would be proud of you. He would be so proud of you. And the old elf put his face in his hands and wept, 18 years of it, on the kitchen floor of the cruel house. And Sirius stood in the doorway watching the servant. He'd hated all his life come apart over the brother. He'd hated all his life. And something passed over his ruined face that was the beginning of a different feeling about both of them. Creature fetched the locket from wherever he had hidden it, cradled in a square of clean cloth he had clearly kept for the purpose, and he pressed it into Hermione's hands and bowed so low his nose touched the stone, and she felt the cold malice of the thing pulse against her palm, the doubled R catching the dim light, whispering at the edge of her attention in a voice that promised it knew her, knew what she'd lost, could give it back. She wrapped it without opening it. She knew exactly what it whispered, and she had no wish to hear it whisper to her, because the locket told you your worst grief and offered to drown you in it, and she had grief enough already and a use for all of it. The ring was worse, and she did not take Harry for the ring. She took Sirius because the ring sat in a ruined shack in a Midlands valley behind curses that had been laid by a younger, stronger Voldemort to kill anyone who reached for it, and she was not going to risk a single hair of Harry's head on a thing she could handle herself with care and an adult's wand at her back. They found the shack rotting in its nettles, and the loose floorboard and the small golden box beneath it shrieking with old dark magic, and Hermione did not touch the ring inside with so much as a fingertip. She knew what wearing it cost. She had seen a blackened, dying hand at the top of a tower, a great wizard killed by his own unbearable longing to slip a dead man's stone onto his finger and call back the ones he'd lost. She lifted the ring with iron tongs into a lead-lined box, the cracked black stone and the worn gold band, the resurrection stone and the curse coiled around it together, and she shut the lid on it and let out a breath she'd been holding since the valley. You knew exactly where that was, Sirius said quietly on the way out, watching her with those eyes that had learned to read danger in 12 years of nothing else to read. Down to the floorboard. You've never been to the Midlands in your life. No, Hermione agreed. I haven't. He didn't push. He had decided on a dock not to push, and he kept the promise, and she loved him for it, and they carried the ring out of the valley and home. That night she laid them out in the dark of the disused dungeon, the 4 anchors she had gathered out of the world, the tarnished diadem behind its loose stone, the slim black diary, the heavy gold locket, the cracked ring in its lead box. 4 pieces of a soul that had cut itself apart to escape dying, lined up on cold stone, waiting. She could not end them yet, the venom for that lay coiled in a sleeping monster under the school, and that was next term's work. But she sat with them a while in the dark, and she did the arithmetic, and the arithmetic, for the first time since the cornflowers, was running in her favor. 4 down. The cup behind goblin steel, and the splinter in a boy she would not name even in her own head, and then there would be nothing left of him at all. She had walked into this war already knowing how it ended. She was beginning quietly in a dungeon full of dead men's soul pieces to believe she might end it somewhere better. Dumbledore summoned her on the second day of the autumn term, and she went up the spiral stair knowing the easy ground was gone. He did not offer sweets this time. He sat behind his desk with his blackened, withered right hand resting on the wood, and Hermione looked at the hand and understood that the timeline had already bent, because in the life she remembered that hand had stayed whole until a tower 4 years from now, and here it was ruined early, and she did the arithmetic in a heartbeat. He went for the ring himself. Recently. And it was gone when he got there, the floorboard already lifted, and he was clever enough to curse himself a little, reaching into an empty box trying to understand who had been there first. He knows. He doesn't know what I am, but he knows someone is taking the anchors, and he has just confirmed that the anchors are real, which means he knows what kind of thing he's been hunting. Miss Granger, said Albus Dumbledore, and there was no twinkle anywhere in him now, only the steel laid bare at last. I went this summer to a certain ruined house in a certain valley, to retrieve a certain object that I had at long last understood the nature of. The object was not there. Someone had been before me, someone who knew precisely where to look and precisely not to touch what should not be touched. He turned his ruined hand over on the desk, palm up, an old man showing a child his wound. I have spent this summer in some pain, learning a lesson about reaching for things one does not fully understand. I find myself wondering whether you have ever had to learn that lesson. You seem to me a young woman who reaches very surely and is never burned. It was the most dangerous thing anyone had said to her since she woke under the cornflowers, and she met it with the truth bent to her purpose, which was the only weapon that had never failed her. I know what they are, sir, she said quietly. The objects. I know what he did to himself, and how many times, and what it means, and where they are. I'm not going to tell you how I know, because you'd spend the rest of your life trying to use it, and it isn't a thing that can be used, it's a thing that can only be spent, and I'm spending it. I know you've been hunting them too. I know you mean well. I even know, and here she let a little of the weight show, just a little, because he had shown her his hand and a wound deserved a wound, that you love Harry and that you have a plan for him, and that your plan ends with him walking somewhere terrible and not coming back because you believe it's the only way. I'm telling you now once plainly so there's no misunderstanding between us later. I have a different plan. Mine ends with him alive. And I have read further down this road than you have, sir, however much that should be impossible, and I am asking you to let me work and to stay out of my way, and to trust that we want the same world even if we'll fight over the cost of it. The office was very quiet. One of the silver instruments puffed a small ring of smoke. Fawkes turned his head and regarded her with one ancient golden eye. And Albus Dumbledore looked at the 12-year-old across his desk for a long, long time, and something in the old face that had been certain for 100 years was, for the first time, unsure. "Who are you?" he said softly. "I'm the friend who got there first," said Hermione. "That's all you need. That's all anyone needs." She stood and gathered her bag. "Mend your hand, sir. Soak it in murtlap and essence of dittany, twice a day, and don't let anyone tell you it'll come back, because it won't, but you can stop it spreading. I'd hate to lose you to your own curiosity. We're going to need you before the end." And she left him there, the most powerful wizard in the world, sitting behind his desk with his ruined hand open on the wood, outmaneuvered by a child he could not begin to measure, watching the door close behind her and trying and failing to find the bottom of her. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The manipulator outmaneuvered to kill the soul. She needed the venom, and to get the venom she had to go down into the dark under the school and face the oldest and deadliest thing it held. And she did not intend to do it as it had been done in her first life, which was by accident in a panic, with a little girl dying on the stones and a boy stumbling into a duel he was not ready for. She intended to do it on purpose, prepared with the basilisk dead before it could open its eyes. "Run it past me again," said Ron, on the night they went down, standing in the flooded ruin of a second-floor bathroom while a ghost named Myrtle watched them from the rafters with mournful interest. "Because the part where we go and fight a 1,000-year-old snake that kills you by looking at you is the part I keep getting stuck on." "We don't fight it," said Hermione, laying out her things on a dry tile with the care of a surgeon laying out instruments. "Fighting it is how people die. We kill it before it's properly awake, and we do it with biology, because the most dangerous monster in the world has one stupid weakness that's been written in every book about it for 1,000 years and nobody ever uses, because nobody ever plans." She held up a small cage, and inside it a fat, indignant cockerel shifted and muttered. "The crow of a rooster is fatal to a basilisk. Fatal, it's not a metaphor, it stops its heart. The heir of Slytherin's first move 50 years ago and again last year was always to kill the castle roosters because the roosters were the one thing that could end his monster, so she latched the cage. We brought a rooster, and we brought mirrors so nobody has to look at it directly, and we brought a sword in case biology lets us down, and we brought a phoenix because I asked nicely." She had asked nicely. She had stood in the empty defense classroom 3 nights running and spoken aloud to the air, to a bird that was not there, and explained plainly and honestly that she was going to save Harry Potter's life and that she would be grateful for the company. And on the 3rd night, Fawkes had come through the window in a soft burst of fire and landed on her shoulder and looked at her with one golden eye and stayed. Phoenixes came to the loyal and the brave and the in need. She qualified on all 3 counts, and the bird knew it, as the hat had known it, as everything ancient and seeing seemed to know it about her the moment it looked. Harry opened the chamber with a word that came out of him in a hiss that made the hair stand up on Ron's arms, and the sink sank away into a great dark pipe, and they went down into the wet stone dark under the school, the 4 of them, 3 children and a phoenix, into a tunnel that stank of damp and old shed skin, and the particular green rot of a thing that has lived underground for 1,000 years. The Chamber of Secrets was a long flooded hall of pillars carved into serpents, lit a sick green, and at the end of it the great stone face of Salazar Slytherin gaped its mouth where the monster slept. Hermione did not make a speech. She had Ron set the rooster cage at the base of the statue, and she had Harry, the only one of them whose hissing the thing would answer, stand ready, and she positioned the 3 of them with their backs to a pillar and their eyes on the small hand mirrors she'd given each of them, so that they would see the chamber only in reflection and never the thing's eyes directly. "Wake it," she said to Harry, "and then close your eyes and open the cage. We only need it out of the statue's mouth and into the open air for the length of 1 crow. That's all, 1 crow." Harry hissed the command, and the great stone mouth ground open, and a sound came out of it like a tide of dry leather dragging over stone, and in the mirrors Hermione watched a thing the width of an ancient oak pour itself out into the green light, scales like wet iron, a body that went on, and she did not look up from the mirror, and her hand found the cage latch by feel, and she flung the cockerel free into the chamber. The rooster, furious at the indignity of the entire evening, landed in 2 inches of cold water, ruffled itself, drew breath, and crowed. The sound tore through the chamber like a blade through silk, absurd and golden and final, and the basilisk convulsed. In the mirror Hermione watched the impossible length of it whip and thrash and crash against the pillars, watched the great wedge of its head slam down into the water, watched the thing that had murdered for 1,000 years die in seconds to a barnyard noise it could not survive, and she felt no triumph, only the cold, clean satisfaction of a sum that comes out right. The crow died away. The water settled. The monster lay still, a mountain of dead iron-scaled muscle steaming faintly in the green light. It was almost an anticlimax. An anticlimax, she had learned, was what victory was supposed to feel like when you planned it properly. The drama was for people who improvised. She had not come down here for drama. She had come down here for a tooth. "Is it?" Ron's voice cracked. "Is that it? Did we just with a chicken?" "With biology and a chicken," said Hermione, lowering her mirror at last, looking at the dead thing directly now that its eyes had gone dark forever. "Drama is overrated, Ronald. Drama is what happens when your plan is bad." She crossed the wet floor to the enormous head, drew Gryffindor's sword from where Fawkes had laid it gleaming on a dry pillar base, and with Harry holding the great jaw open and Ron looking faintly ill, she worked 1 curved fang the length of her forearm free of the dead gum, and then a second and a third until she had a wrapped bundle of them, each one weeping a clear and lethal venom that could eat through anything in the world, including the iron casing of a man who had cut his soul into pieces and hidden them where he thought no one would ever dare to come. 6 anchors, she said softly, kneeling in the greenlit dark with the teeth of a dead monster cradled in cloth in her hands, more powerful in this moment than she had ever been in either life. 5 objects and a boy. I have the venom for the objects now. The last is harder, but the objects at least end tonight. They destroyed them that same night in the dungeon where the diadem had waited a year behind its loose stone, because some things should not be left until morning. She laid them out on the floor in a row, the 4 anchors she had gathered, the tarnished diadem, the slim black diary, the heavy gold locket, the cracked black ring in its lead box. She gave each of her 2 friends a fang and kept one for herself, because this was a thing the 3 of them had earned the right to do together, and she would not hoard it. And one by one, on her count, they drove the venom-weeping teeth of a dead monster into the casings of a murderer's soul. The diary screamed first, a high thin wail, and ink poured out of the wound in the page like black blood, and the thing inside it died shrieking and was gone. The locket fought hardest. It sprang open under the fang, and a cold, dark voice rose out of it trying to bargain, trying to show them their worst fears in a billow of smoke. And Hermione looked at the shape it tried to make of her, a great hall full of bodies under a dawn ceiling, and she said, "I've already seen that. You're a year too late to fright me with the future. I'm the one who remembers it," and she drove the fang home, and the smoke screamed and tore and died. The ring she opened in its box at arm's length, and the venom ate the soul out of it, and she watched the black stone crack across and went very still. because she knew what the stone was, knew the old story of three brothers and the small unkillable longing it carried, and she lifted the cracked resurrection stone out of the ruined gold with the tongs and wrapped it away separately, untouched, a thing too dangerous to use and too dangerous to leave, to be dealt with another day. The diadem last, the easiest, the first she'd ever taken and the last she ended, and the cold thing that had whispered to her of cleverness and recognition gave one final small scream and went silent forever. 4 anchors, gone in a night on a dungeon floor by 3 12-year-olds with the teeth of a thing they'd killed with a chicken. That's it then, Ron said hoarsely, looking at the row of dead, ruined objects. We did it. He can't come back now. 2 left, said Hermione, and the room went quiet, because they had all heard the number she'd said in the chamber. There's a cup behind goblin steel in a vault we can't break into. I have a plan for the cup, and it has large ears and is very fond of Harry, and that's tomorrow's problem. She drew breath, and she looked at Harry, and she found that the hardest sentence of 2 lifetimes did not want to come out, and she made it come out anyway, because he had earned the truth, and she did not lie to him. And there's one more, the 6th. It's the reason your scar hurts when Voldemort is near, Harry. It's the reason you can speak to snakes. It's the reason the hat wanted to put you in Slytherin. She held his eyes across the row of dead soul pieces. The night he tried to kill you, when the curse rebounded, a piece of him broke off, and the only living thing in the room to catch it was you. You've carried a splinter of his soul in your scar your whole life. You are the 6th anchor, Harry. You are the last Horcrux. The dungeon was very still. Ron had gone white, and Harry, who had spent a year growing under her teaching from a starving cupboard ghost into a boy with a shield charm and a godfather and a steady hand, looked at her, and what crossed his face was not horror but a terrible dawning understanding. That's why you've never once said how this ends for me, he said slowly. All year you'll tell me everything else. You go quiet about that. Because in the version you remember, he stopped and started again, gentler, for her sake. In the version you remember, the only way to kill the splinter was to kill me, wasn't it? That's how it went the first time. That's the ending you didn't like. She could not speak. She nodded once because he deserved that much truth, and because the alternative was to let the careful structure of her whole face come down in a dungeon in front of him. Then it's a good thing, said Harry, and he crossed the floor and took both her hands in his, as she had taken his on a platform a lifetime ago, that you're the most stubborn person who ever lived, and that you came all the way back through the whole ruin of it to write a different ending, and that you are not, I happen to know, in the habit of accepting the first answer a problem gives you. So you've got an idea, haven't you? You've had it for ages. That's why you needed the venom and the phoenix in the same place. His mouth tilted. Tell me the idea, Hermione. I'm not scared. I held on once when you asked me to. I'll hold on again. She took the idea to Dumbledore the next morning because the idea needed a phoenix and a witness and an exit from the school, and because the time had come to have the conversation the two of them had been circling for a year and a half. She did not go alone. She went with Harry because it was his life they would be deciding, and with Sirius because Sirius was his guardian and had a right to be in the room, and Sirius came up the spiral stair beside her with a barely leashed fury already burning in him, because she had told him in the night what the old plan had been, and Sirius Black had views about old men who planned for children to die. Dumbledore heard her out without interrupting, his ruined hand still on the desk, his blue eyes moving from Hermione to Harry to the seething godfather and back. She laid it all on the table, the 5 objects destroyed, the cup soon to follow, and the 6th anchor sitting in the room with them sipping with admirable steadiness a cup of the headmaster's tea. You knew, said Sirius before Hermione could get to the idea, his voice shaking. You knew Harry was carrying a piece of that thing, for years. And your plan, your great plan, the one you never told anyone, it was to wait until the right moment and let Voldemort kill him. To raise him like the word came out of him broken, like a pig for slaughter, and call it the greater good. Tell me I'm wrong, Albus. Look at me and tell me I've got it wrong. And Albus Dumbledore, to his credit, did not look away. You do not have it wrong, he said quietly, and the admission cost him. It was visible on the old face what it cost. I believe still, in the version of the world where I am the only one who has looked down this road, that the fragment in Harry could be destroyed by no means but the death of its host, and that the death, freely accepted at Voldemort's own hand, might carry a protection that would shield the others as Lily's death shielded Harry. I believed I was condemning one beloved child to save 1,000. I have carried that belief like a stone in my chest for 11 years, and I have hated it, and I have not seen another way. His eyes moved to Hermione, and there was something in them now that had never been there before, something close to hope and close to fear. And then a girl appeared who reaches very surely and is never burned, who took the anchors out of the world before I could find them, who speaks of futures as a person speaks of memories. I have run out of road, Miss Granger. You have not. So I will do the thing I have never in my life been good at. He folded his ruined hand over his whole one. I will listen, tell me the other way. There's a door, said Hermione, between living and dying, not a metaphor, a real place, a threshold, where a person who is nearly dead waits to choose whether to go on or come back. I've been there. She did not explain how. She watched him decide not to ask. A soul fragment is a parasite. It survives because it has a living host to ride. But a parasite cannot ride a corpse. If you take the host to the very edge of that door, to the threshold, near enough to dying that the body is failing, the fragment panics. It cannot bear a dying vessel. It flees to save itself. It tears loose and is expelled. And in that instant, before the host actually passes through the door, you pull him back. You destroy the expelled fragment, and you call the host home. She drew the bundle of fangs from her bag and laid one on the desk, and beside it she nodded at Fawkes drowsing on his perch. Basilisk venom to open the door, phoenix tears to close it. A precise dose of the one to bring him to the threshold, the bird's tears ready the instant the splinter flees to drag him back from it before he crosses. And an anchor of love to hold him to this side while the rest is happening, because that is the oldest magic there is, the one his mother used, the one nothing he made can break. She looked at Dumbledore steadily. It's a controlled near-death, deliberately induced, immediately reversed. It is the most dangerous thing I have ever attempted, and I have attempted some things, and it does not require Harry to die. Fires him to come close with everyone he loves holding the rope, and then it brings him back. That is the other way. That is the ending I came back to write. The office was silent for a long moment. The silver instruments puffed. Fawkes opened one golden eye and looked at the fang on the desk and seemed to understand exactly what was being asked of him. "It is insane," said Dumbledore softly. "It is reckless beyond anything I would ever sanction." A pause. "It is also, I think, possible. Which is more than I have been able to say of any plan in 11 years. He looked at Harry. "It is your life, Harry, not mine, whatever I have told myself, not even hers, though she loves you enough to have crossed the abyss for you. Yours, do you trust her with it?" "With all of it," said Harry without a flicker. "I've trusted her with all of it since a park bench. She's never once been wrong about how to save me. I'm not going to start doubting her at the last fence." They did it 3 nights later in a warded room off the hospital wing, with the door sealed and the people who loved Harry standing around a narrow bed, and it was the longest and worst quarter of an hour of Hermione's 2 lives. She had rehearsed every step until she could have done it in her sleep, because the difference between a controlled near-death and a death was measured in seconds, and she did not intend to lose Harry to a rounding error. The dose of venom was tiny, measured to the drop into a draft she'd spent 2 days brewing, calculated against Harry's weight and the strength of his magic and a dozen variables she'd worked and reworked on parchment until Madame Pomfrey, recruited and sworn and white-lipped, had checked her arithmetic 3 times and found nothing to correct. Fawkes stood at the head of the bed, perfectly still, the great bird's golden eyes fixed on Harry. Dumbledore stood at the foot with his wand ready to do the one thing only he could do, hold the fleeing fragment in the air and pin it for destruction the instant it tore loose. Sirius stood against the wall with his fists clenched and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Ron held the venom fang in steady hands, ready to drive it into the expelled splinter on Dumbledore's word. And Hermione sat on the edge of the bed and took Harry's hand in both of hers, because the anchor of love could not be a thing you delegated. It had to be her. She was the rope. "You know what's going to happen," she said low just to him, the rest of the room falling away. "It's going to feel like dying because it is, a little, right up to the edge of it and not 1 inch further. You're going to come to a place. It might look like somewhere you know. There'll be a part of you that wants to go on through because it's quiet there and you've been tired your whole life, and quiet is a powerful thing to offer someone who's never had it." Her voice did not shake. She would not let it shake, not now, not for this. "And you're going to feel me the whole time. I'm going to be holding this hand and I am not going to let go, and you are going to follow the feeling of my hand back as you followed a chip shop receipt back to believing somebody would come for you. I came for you then, I'll come for you now. I'll always come for you, Harry. That's the truest thing about me. Now hold on and drink it and come back." "I'll come back," said Harry, and he smiled at her, the unguarded smile that had taken a year of being chosen to learn how to make, and he drank the draught down and he closed his eyes. It happened fast. His hand went cold in hers between one breath and the next, the color draining out of him, his chest rising shallow and then shallower, and Madame Pomfrey's instruments began a thin, frightened wailing, and Hermione held on and did not let her face do anything but love, because the last thing she would let him feel on his way to the door was fear in the hand he was following. Cold, colder, his breath stopped, the instruments shrieked, and then from the scar on his still white forehead something came. It came out of him in a foul black vapor with a scream in it, a scream of pure refusing hatred, the same voice she'd heard in a chamber 2 years and a lifetime ago, the last and largest of the splinters torn loose from the only home it had ever known, and it hung in the air over the dying child howling, and Dumbledore's wand was already there, white fire wrapping it, pinning it, holding it screaming in the air. Now, Ron drove the fang through it. The fragment died the way all the others had died, shrieking, tearing, gone, the black vapor shredding into nothing in a wash of phoenix fire. And the scream cut off, and the room rang with the sudden silence, and on the narrow bed Harry Potter lay still and white and not breathing on the wrong side of the door, the splinter gone and the host gone with it, and for one heartbeat Hermione understood that she had been wrong, that her arithmetic had failed. That she had brought him to the threshold, and the threshold had taken him. "Fawkes," she said, and it came out as the only word she had ever truly prayed. "Now, please, now." and the phoenix bent its head over the child and wept. Tears fell onto the still white face, onto the scar that was now only a scar, healing pearl drops of the oldest medicine in the world, and Hermione bent over him with her forehead against their joined hands and poured everything she was down the rope. Every mile of the purple bus and every chip shared and every spell drilled and every promise kept, all of it. Come back, you're wanted, you are chosen, you're not alone. There's a whole life on this side of the door and I am in it, come back. Harry gasped. His chest heaved, his back arched, color flooded into his face, his hands spasmed and gripped hers hard enough to hurt, and his eyes flew open, green and wild and alive, and he dragged in a great shuddering breath of the world, and the instrument stopped shrieking and began jubilantly to sing, and Sirius made a wreck of a sound against the wall and slid down it, and Ron sat down hard on the floor with the spent fang in his hand, and Hermione, who had not allowed herself to break in a year and a half of holding everything together, broke finally and put her face down against Harry's chest and felt his heart going under her cheek, alive, and let the whole flood of it come. I found the place, Harry said hoarse, his hand coming up to her hair, wondering, alive. It was a railway station, all white, and you were right, there was a part of me that wanted to stay, it was so quiet. His fingers tightened. And then I felt your hand. So I came back, I just followed your hand back like you said, he breathed. I told you I could hold on. You held on, she managed, against his heartbeat. You held on, you stupid, brave, impossible boy, you held on. Behind them, very quietly, Albus Dumbledore lowered his wand and looked at the two children on the bed, the one returned from the edge of death and the one who had reached across the abyss and dragged him home. And the most powerful wizard in the world wept openly, for the plan he had carried for 11 years and would never now have to use, and for the simple, unbearable fact that there had been another way all along, and that it had taken a girl who remembered the future to find it. Harry slept for 2 days, the deep, clean sleep of a body that had been to the threshold and back, and had decided on the whole to stay, and Hermione did not leave the hospital wing for any of it. She slept in the chair beside him with her hand still wrapped around his, because some part of her did not quite believe the rope could be let go yet, and she woke each time he stirred and watched the color stay in his face and the scar stay quiet. And on the morning of the 3rd day he opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling for a while and then turned his head and found her as he always found her first and said, "It's gone, isn't it? The thing I can feel where it isn't." He lifted a hand to the scar, the old reflex, and let it fall. "It's just quiet in there now. I didn't know it was ever loud until it stopped." "It's gone," she said. "Burned, you're just Harry now, all the way through, no passengers." He was quiet a while, taking the size of it. "My whole life," he said, "there was a piece of the worst man in the world living behind my eyes, and nobody told me, and the one person who finally did told me only because she'd already found a way to get it out without it costing me anything." He looked at her and his eyes were too bright and he didn't hide it. "Do you understand what you are to me? Because I don't think I have words big enough, and I'm worried you think I haven't noticed, with everything moving so fast. I've noticed. This everything, you taught me that's a strength and not a curse." He turned her hand over in his, studying it, the unscarred palm. "You crossed something nobody's ever crossed. For me, I'm going to spend whatever life you've bought me being worth it." "You were always worth it," said Hermione, and found that her own voice had gone unsteady at last here, safe where it was finally allowed to. "That's the part nobody ever told you and I came back to fix. You didn't have to earn it. You never did. You were worth crossing the world for when you were a thin boy on a climbing frame who'd been taught to ask permission to laugh. The saving wasn't a reward for being special. It was just what you do for someone you love. I keep telling you that's the truest thing about you, that you were loved on purpose. I'd like one of these days for you to actually believe it." She squeezed his hand. "We've got time now. That's the whole prize, not the war. The time. You can take as long as you need to believe it." He smiled at that, the unguarded one, and closed his eyes again and slept, and she sat with him in the morning light and let herself, for the first time since she had opened her eyes under the cornflowers, feel something that was not grief and was not strategy and was not the weight. It took her a while to put a name to it because she was out of practice. It was peace, just a thread of it, narrow as a wand. She held on to that, too. Dumbledore came on the 3rd afternoon, and he came as a different man than the one who had set a trap in a corridor full of children 2 years ago. He stood at the foot of the bed where the sleeping child lay healed, and he looked at Hermione for a long time, and the steel was gone from him, and the stagecraft was gone from him, and what was left was only an old soldier who had laid down a stone he had carried for 11 years. "I have spent my whole life," he said, "being the cleverest person in every room and arranging the people in those rooms toward ends I judged necessary, and telling myself that the weight I carried entitled me to move them. I arranged Harry. I arranged his whole childhood, every cold year of it, to make him into a person who could walk to his death without flinching when the time came. I told myself it was love, perhaps some of it was, but you, Miss Granger," he shook his head slowly. "You did not arrange him. You found him in a park, and you fed him, and you taught him, and you told him the truth, and you built him into a person who could walk to the edge of death and walk back because someone was holding the other end of the rope. You did with love what I tried to do with calculation, and your way worked and mine would have killed him, and I am too old and too tired to pretend the difference doesn't shame me." He drew a breath. "So I am going to do the only useful thing left to a man who has been comprehensively outthought by a child. I am going to put everything I have at your disposal. My power, my name, my order, my wand, such as my burned hand can still wield it. You have a last move to make and an enemy to draw out, and I should very much like to be standing beside you when you make it, if you will have an old fool who was wrong." Hermione looked at the headmaster of Hogwarts offering her his sword, and she understood that she had won the longest and quietest of all her battles, the one she had been fighting since a hat whispered a warning under her hair, and she had won it not by defeating him but by showing him a better way and letting him choose it. "I'll have you, sir," she said. "Gladly, we're going to need you. There's one piece of him left in a vault, and then there's the Wraith himself out in the dark, and I mean to finish both before the year is out. But you should know what you're signing up to." She met his eyes. "I'm not going to wait for him to come to us. I'm going to make him come to me on ground I've chosen, on a night I've chosen, certain he can't lose. And then I'm going to take everything from him at once. It won't be a fair fight. I don't believe in fair fights. Fair fights are how good people die." "Are you all right with that, my dear girl?" said Albus Dumbledore, and for the first time in either of her lives she saw him smile without any calculation in it at all. "I am entirely all right with that. Show me where to stand." The cup was almost an afterthought, which was the most satisfying thing about it. Dobby took it from the Lestrange vault 2 days later, because no goblin ward in the world was built to stop a free house elf who loved someone, and elf magic walked through Gringotts' deepest defenses the way water walks through a net. Hermione did not ask him to steal gold. She asked him to fetch one specific cursed object and to touch nothing else and to come straight home. And Dobby, swelling with the importance of being asked, popped out of the Granger's garden and popped back into it 90 seconds later with a small golden cup with a badger on its side held at arm's length and a look of tremendous distaste on his face. They destroyed it that afternoon on the lawn with the last of the fangs, and the cup screamed its small scream and died, and Hermione's father, who had been mowing, switched off the mower and watched a piece of a Dark Lord's soul shriek and perish on his grass and said after a while, "Well, that's the begonias sorted anyway," and her mother laughed, and the war went a little further into the past. 7 pieces. He had made his soul into 7, counting the ravaged scrap that still walked in a wraith's borrowed shape, and 6 of the 7 were destroyed: the diary, the ring, the locket, the cup, the diadem, and the splinter in a boy that had been drawn out and burned without taking him with it. Nagini was a snake in a far country, and not yet, in this bent and salvaged timeline, anything more than a snake. There was nothing left holding Lord Voldemort to the living world but the single wretched fragment of soul he had left, riding the dark, mortal now, killable now, a man at last and no longer anything more. "He doesn't know," Harry said on the lawn looking at the dead cup. "Does he? He doesn't know they're gone. He still thinks he's immortal." "He knows some of them are gone," said Hermione. "He'd have felt the diary, maybe the ring, but no, he doesn't know the scale of it. He doesn't know he's mortal. He thinks he's a king who's lost a few jewels, and any day now he'll find a way back into a body and start again, patient as the grave, as he always does." She looked east as she looked across a bookshop at 2 living twins, as she'd looked at a dead monster in a greenlit chamber. "Which is the last advantage I have, and the biggest. He doesn't know he can die. So when I bring him to the place I've chosen, he'll come like a king collecting what's his, certain he can't lose, and he'll find out he's only a man, in a room full of people who love each other at the exact moment it's too late to matter." Dumbledore, who had come to stand at the edge of the lawn, an old man with a ruined hand watching a family destroy the last of his life's great enemy on a suburban garden, spoke quietly into the warm afternoon. "You mean to engineer the ending, not to wait for it. Not to suffer it on his terms in a castle under siege with the dead laid out in the hall." His blue eyes found her, and there was no steel left in them now, only an old soldier recognizing his successor. "You have already seen that ending, haven't you, the one in the castle? You have stood in that hall." "I've stood in that hall," said Hermione. "I read the last page, sir. I told you that the first time. I'm not turning to it again." She looked at Harry, alive and brown in the sun beside her, at Sirius mending on the garden bench, at Ron arguing with Dobby about whether elves liked lemonade, at the whole improbable salvaged family she had built out of a chip shop and a war ledger, and a refusal to accept the answer the world had given her. "I'm writing a better one, and I'd be grateful for your wand at the end of it, headmaster. Because there's one piece of him left, and it's time to stop hunting his shadows and go and finish the last of him." Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. The confrontation. She engineered the trick with a trap. Hermione had learned in a war that had not happened yet, was that you did not catch a predator by chasing it. You caught it by offering it the one thing it could not walk past, in a place where you had already decided how the story ended. Lord Voldemort, bodiless, starving in the forests of Albania, possessing snakes and small frightened animals and dreaming his patient immortal dreams, could walk past almost anything. He had walked past a decade. But there were two things in all the world he could not refuse, and Hermione held both of them, and she meant to braid them into a single lure so perfect that the wraith would come running to its own end, believing it ran toward its triumph. The first thing he could not refuse was a body. He was a king reduced to vapor, and a king will crawl across broken glass for a throne. The second thing he could not refuse was the child who had unmade him, the 1-year-old who had cost him everything, the living insult he had been promised by prophecy and denied by a mother's love. Offer the wraith a road back into flesh, and at the end of that road set Harry Potter like a lamb on an altar, and Lord Voldemort would come. He would come certain, because he did not know his anchors were ash. He would come a king collecting his due, and he would arrive a man walking into a room he could not leave. "Little Hangleton," she said, and spread the old Ordnance Survey map across the Grangers' kitchen table. The whole strange war council of them gathered around it. Harry and Ron and Sirius, Remus Lupin newly returned to the world and to the friend he'd mourned, Dumbledore with his ruined hand, Amelia Bones with her monocle and her hard fair eyes, Dobby vibrating on a chair with a tea-towel toga and a stolen butter knife he refused to be parted from. There's a graveyard there. His father's grave is in it, and the ruin of his father's house above it. It's the place he was always going to choose for himself in the life I remember. It's where his vanity built the whole theater of his return. So we don't fight that vanity, we feed it, we give him his graveyard, and then we make it ours. "And the bait," said Sirius, who did not like the next part and had said so loudly 3 times. "Is me," said Harry before Hermione could. He said it steady, having held on twice now and come back both times. "It has to be me. He won't come for a rumor, he'll come for me. That's the whole point of me, isn't it? I'm the thing he can't stand to leave alive." He met Sirius's furious, worried eyes. "And I'll be the safest person in that graveyard because she'll have spent a month making sure of it, and because I trust her, and because I am sick to the back teeth of being a thing that things happen to. For once I get to be the hook that catches the shark. Let me be the hook, Sirius. I've earned the hook." Hermione laid it out then, the whole architecture of it, as she laid everything out so they could all hold her to it. The lure would go out through the cracks she'd mapped. A whisper passed hand to hand through the frightened remnants of his service, that a faithful one had found the way to bring the master home, and that Harry Potter would be delivered as the final rite at the dark of the moon in the graveyard at Little Hangleton. The wraith would hear it, the wraith would come, and the graveyard, by the time it came, would not be a graveyard. It would be a killing ground dressed as an altar, ringed in wards Dumbledore and Bones and Lupin would lay under her direction, every headstone a mark she had measured, every sightline accounted for, the whole place a closed fist that looked until it shut like an open hand. "He believes he is immortal," she said. "That is the only thing that still matters about him, and it is the gift that keeps on giving. A man who knows he can die fights carefully. A man who is certain he cannot die walks straight into the center of the room and gloats. We are going to let him gloat. We are going to let him think he has won, right up until the instant Harry's mother reaches up out of 11 years ago and burns him, and then we are going to end the last living piece of him before he understands that there is nothing left to catch him when he falls." "You're sure the protection still holds?" said Lupin quietly. He'd asked it gently, the careful question of a careful man. "Lily's, after all this time." "It holds," said Hermione, with the certainty of a person who had watched the other timeline burn through every variable. "In the life I remember, it lasted until he took Harry's blood to rebuild his body, and that one act undid it. He never took the blood this time, because the rite that would have let him take it needed a servant who's been sitting in a cell since May, and I put him there. So the protection is intact, older, deeper, never spent. When the wraith reaches for Harry, it will be reaching for the one thing in the world built specifically to destroy it. We are not hoping. I do not hope. I calculate, and then I make the calculation true." The table was quiet. Then Amelia Bones, who had spent a career being lied to by clever people and had developed an ear for the one telling the truth, looked at the 12-year-old across the map and said, "I have signed off on operations run by Aurors with 30 years' service that were planned a 10th as well as this. I don't know what you are, Miss Granger, and I've stopped asking because I've decided I'd rather have you on my side than understood." She tapped the graveyard with one blunt finger. "I'm in. The department's in. Tell me where you want my people, and they'll be there, and they'll hold the line until you spring it." "Thank you," said Hermione, and meant it, and for a moment the weight she had carried alone since the cornflower sat on a dozen other shoulders too, and she let it, and it was lighter than it had ever been. That night when the council had broken and the house had gone to sleep, she found Harry in the garden, sitting on the bench where Sirius had mended all summer, looking up at the dark of the moon that wasn't there. She sat down beside him. She didn't say anything for a while. The grass smelled of the day's warmth letting go, and somewhere a late blackbird was finishing its song, and the friend she had crossed a war to save sat beside her, alive, breathing, 13 years old in a week and a day whole. "If it goes wrong," Harry said, "it won't, but if it does," he turned to look at her. "I just want to say it once in case there isn't an after. You know what you are to me. You found me in a park when I was nothing, when I thought I'd be nothing forever, and you decided I was worth coming back for, and you never once stopped coming back. Everything good in my life walked in behind you. Sirius, Ron, being able to do magic without being scared of it, being a person instead of a scar, all of it's yours. You built the whole of it." His voice was very steady, as it got when a thing mattered most. "So whatever you are, wherever you came from, whatever you remember that you won't tell me, it doesn't change anything except to make me certain. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Hermione Granger. I'd follow your hand back from anywhere. I already have, twice." She looked at him in the dark, this person she had loved across the ruin of two worlds, and she found she didn't have a strategy for this, and for once she didn't want one. "You're the reason I came back at all," she said simply. "Out of all of it, all the dead, all the names I carry. When I woke up under that ceiling and I had to decide whether it was real and whether to fight it, the thing that made me get up was you. A boy in a cupboard who hadn't been born to me yet in this life and who I loved anyway because I'd already loved you once, all the way to the end. I didn't come back to win a war, Harry. The war was just the price of the thing I actually came back for." She let him see it, all of it, the whole undefended truth of her, just this once in a dark garden the night before the end. "I came back for you. I'd do it again. I'd do it 100 times. Now stop talking like there isn't going to be an after, because there is. I've planned it down to the headstones, and you and I are both going to be standing in it." They had 3 days to turn a graveyard into a fist, and Hermione spent them as she spent everything, which was completely. It was a strange thing to stand in the wet grass of Little Hangleton at dusk and direct the most powerful wizard alive and the head of magical law enforcement and a werewolf and a freed convict where to lay their wards, and stranger still that none of them argued. They had all in their separate ways come to the same conclusion about the bushy-haired child with the surveyor's eyes, that she had already walked this ground in her head 100 times, and that the only sane thing to do was hand her the chalk. So she walked the rows of leaning stones and set her marks, here a ward that would hold in there a sightline that must stay clear, and Dumbledore followed with his ruined hand and his unburned one, and laid magic into the earth that made the air over the graveyard hum like a struck wire, and Bones positioned her oars behind the stones that would hide them best, and Lupin paced the perimeter testing the seams. And Sirius stood at the center by the riddled tomb where Harry would stand and would not move from the spot, as though by standing on it first he could make it safe for Harry by the simple force of having been there. She built it in layers as she built everything. The outer ring was a lie, a graveyard that looked, to anything approaching, exactly like a graveyard, lonely and unwarded and ripe. Inside the lie sat the trap, dormant, keyed to a single word in her voice, a dome of containment that would slam up out of the ground the instant she spoke it, and turn the open hand into a closed one with no gaps and no exits and no dark trees to flee into. And inside the trap sat the people, hidden and still, and inside the people, at the dead center, the bait. She measured the distance from the broken stone angel to the tomb a dozen times until she could have crossed it blind, because when the moment came she would have to, and she did not intend to be one step too far away to be the rope. The lure went out on the first night, the way she designed it, a rumor set loose in the right gutters, that a servant faithful beyond the others had found the old rite, and gathered the components, and would deliver the potter boy to his master at the dark of the moon, in the place where the master's father lay. She did not know which broken Death Eater would carry it east, only that one of them would, because hope is the most infectious thing in the world, and she had engineered a hope no servant of his could fail to pass along. Somewhere in the Albanian dark, a thing of smoke and hunger would hear that its long patience was over, and would not stop to wonder why the gift had come so easily, because a king certain of his immortality does not check the teeth of a horse he believes he is owed. On the last evening, with the trap laid in the dark of the moon a day away, the whole strange company ate together at the Grangers' kitchen table, and Hermione's mother fed them all whether they were hungry or not, and for one ordinary hour the war council was just people, passing dishes, arguing about nothing, a werewolf laughing at a dentist's joke and a freed convict stealing the last roast potato off a famous orphan's plate and a small elf wearing a tea cozy and presiding over the gravy. Hermione sat among them and watched and said little, and under the noise she did the only arithmetic that frightened her any more, which was the arithmetic of how much she now had to lose. She had spent 2 lifetimes with nothing she could not afford to lay down. She did not have that armor now. Table was full of people she loved, and tomorrow she was going to walk all of them into a graveyard and call down the worst thing in the world, and the cost of being wrong had a dozen faces now, and every one of them was passing her the peas. "You've gone quiet," Harry said beside her low. "I've gone careful," she said. "There's a difference. Tomorrow I'm not careful for me. Tomorrow I'm careful for all of them." She looked at him. "It's a better kind of frightened. I recommend it. It means you've got something." The wraith came to Little Hangleton on the dark of the moon, exactly as she had promised it would, and it came certain of its triumph, which was the last mistake it would ever make. The graveyard lay black and still under a sky with no moon in it, the headstones leaning at their 1,000-year angles, the great marble bulk of the riddled tomb pale at the center of it where Hermione had set the altar of the lie. Harry stood beside the tomb, alone in the open, a small straight figure in the dark, the bait on the hook, and he did not look afraid, because Hermione had spent a month making sure he had no reason to be. He could not see the ring of people in the dark around him. He did not need to, he knew they were there. Sirius and Lupin behind the yew to the north, Bones and 4 of her best Aurors low among the stones to the east and west, Dumbledore and his ruined hand in the shadow of the church wall, Dobby crouched invisible at the tomb's foot with his butter knife and his terrible loyalty, and Hermione herself flat behind the broken angel 6 feet from Harry, close enough to touch him, close enough to be the rope. A wind came up that had nothing to do with weather. The temperature dropped as it dropped in graveyards and tents in winter and the inside of her chest at the worst moment of her first life. And out of the trees at the graveyard's edge a darkness moved that was darker than the dark around it, a roiling spectral smoke with 2 red points burning in it, and it poured between the headstones toward Harry by the tomb, and it spoke in the high cold voice that had ended her world once already. Harry Potter, it breathed, circling him, smoke and red eyes and a hunger 13 years old. How you have grown, how brave to stand and wait for me, and where's my faithful servant who promised me your blood and a body to spend it in? The red eyes flicked once around the dark graveyard, a flicker of the old caution. No matter, the servant is late, and I am not patient tonight, and you are here, and that is enough. I have wanted you dead since before you could walk, child. I think I shall not wait for ceremony. I think I shall simply take what I came for. I think you should, said Harry, steady as the stone behind him, and that steadiness was its own act of war, from a child who had learned he was not a thing that things happened to. Come and take it, then. Come and finish what you started. I've been waiting my whole life to meet you properly. And the wraith, certain, immortal, a king collecting his due, swept forward in a column of black smoke and seized Harry by his outstretched arm, and reached its cold spectral hand toward the scar on his forehead to take back the splinter that was no longer there, and the blood that would undo a protection it did not know was still whole. And Lily Potter reached up out of 11 years ago and set the wraith on fire. The scream that tore across the graveyard was the worst sound Hermione had heard in either life, and she had heard a great many. Where the smoke touched Harry it did not take him, it burned. The protection flared white gold off his skin, off the scar, a mother's 11-year-old refusal made into living flame, and it caught the wraith and would not let go, and the column of black smoke convulsed and thickened and was dragged, shrieking, half into flesh. A malformed, agonized corporeal thing trapped against the child it could neither possess nor release, burning, made solid enough at last to die. Now, said Hermione, and rose from behind the broken angel, and the graveyard sprang shut like a fist. The ward she had measured to the inch slammed up out of the ground in a dome of light, sealing the killing floor, and there was no east or west or trees to flee to, only a closed, bright cage with a burning dark lord in the center of it, and the people who loved Harry Potter ringed around its edge with their wands already up. Bones's Aurors rose from the stones. Sirius and Lupin came round the yew shoulder to shoulder. Dumbledore stepped from the shadow of the church with white fire already gathering at his ruined hand, and Fawkes came down out of the starless sky in a long banner of flame, shrieking the song that was death to dark things, and the wraith, half flesh and burning and pinned, understood at last, in the final seconds, the thing it had been too certain to check. You have no anchors left, Hermione told it, walking toward it across the graveyard, unhurried, unafraid, the girl who had read the last page. The diary, the ring, the locket, the cup, the diadem, the piece you left in him, all of it gone months ago. I have been taking your soul apart while you dreamed in the trees and thought yourself a king. There is nothing holding you to the world tonight, Tom. You are not immortal. You never were after I woke up. You are just a man on fire in a graveyard, and you came when I called. She stopped beside Harry and took his free hand, the one the burning thing wasn't holding, and his fingers closed around hers, and the two of them faced it together, the partnership it had never seen coming, the friend who got there first and the friend she had refused to lose. And now my friend is going to do the thing your prophecy promised him, together, the way we do everything. Together, Harry agreed and raised his wand, and Hermione raised hers beside it, and around the cage a dozen others rose with them, Sirius and Remus and Amelia Bones and her Aurors and the greatest wizard in the world. Every wand pointed at the single burning fragment of the thing that had taken so much from so many. It tried to flee. Of course it tried to flee. Fleeing was the only thing it had ever truly believed in, the whole architecture of its torn and tattered soul built around the refusal to die. The smoke tried to tear loose from the flesh the protection had forced upon it, tried to pour up and out and away into the dark to hide and heal and wait another decade in the trees. But there was nowhere to pour to. The dome held, the phoenix fire was everywhere. And there was no Horcrux waiting in any vault or shack or castle to catch the fragment and keep it breathing. No splinter in a sleeping child, no jewel in the dark, nothing at all, only the open door at the end of everyone's road, the one he had spent 70 years and 7 murders running from. Harry and Hermione cast as one, their voices together, their wands together, their joined hands steady between them, and the light that left them was not red and was not a curse. It was simply the end, clean and white and final, the full focused will of two people who loved each other, and the world more than the thing in front of them had ever loved anything. It struck the burning wraith full on. And Lord Voldemort, mortal at last, anchorless at last, out of bodies and out of jewels and out of time, threw back his malformed head and came apart, the smoke and the flesh and the red eyes and the high cold scream all unraveling at once into nothing, into less than nothing, into the quiet beyond the door that he had been so terribly, fatally afraid of, and was gone. The graveyard rang with silence. The dome of wards faded down into the dark. Fox's song trailed away into the ordinary night, and somewhere beyond the wall an owl asked its ordinary question, and the dark of the moon hung over a graveyard in the Midlands where the longest war in living memory had just ended, without a castle in flames, without a hall of the dead laid out under the dawn, with every single person who had walked in still alive to walk back out. Harry stood with his hand in Hermione's and looked at the patch of scorched grass where the worst thing in the world had been, and he was shaking, and he did not let go of her, and she did not let go of him. "It's over," he said, and his voice broke on it, the disbelief of a child who has learned that good news is a trap, learning finally that this once it wasn't. "Hermione, it's actually over, you actually did it." "We did it," she said, and turned and looked at the living ring of them in the dark, the godfather and the werewolf and the law and the old wizard and the small fierce elf, all of them alive, all of them whole, the whole bright impossible company she had assembled out of a chip shop and a war ledger and the simple refusal to accept the answer the world had handed her. "We all did it. Look at them, Harry, look who's still standing. That's the part I came back for, not the ending of him." The keeping of them. For a moment nobody moved, the whole company frozen in the dark graveyard with their wands still half raised, half expecting the worst thing in the world to reassemble itself out of the scorched air if they lowered them too soon. It was Amelia Bones who broke it, because breaking frozen moments was her trade. She walked to the patch of burned grass, crouched, passed her wand over it in the slow, careful sweep of a professional confirming a death, and stood and said, in a voice pitched to carry to every hidden corner of the killing floor, "It's done. Stand down, all of you, it's done." And only then did the wands come down one by one around the ring, and the held breath of a dozen people go out at once into the cold. Sirius reached Harry before the echo had faded. He came across the graveyard at a dead run and caught his godson up off his feet, the two of them clinging in the dark, and Hermione heard him saying something into Harry's hair that was half a curse and half a prayer and entirely about never, ever doing that again, and Harry was laughing and crying at once and saying he was fine, the protection held exactly like she said it would. And Sirius said something extremely rude about exactly like she said it would that made Lupin bark a laugh from the dark. Dumbledore did not go to them. He came instead to Hermione, and he stopped a few feet away in the starless dark, and the most powerful wizard in the world looked at the 12-year-old who had just ended the thing he had spent a century failing to end, and he did a thing she had not expected and would not forget. He inclined his head to her, slowly, fully, the bow of an old soldier to the one who had won the field. "I have imagined the end of him 1,000 ways across 50 years, he said quietly. In every one of them the price was somebody's child, a school in flames, a boy walking into a forest. I could not imagine it any other way because I had let the manner of his evil teach me the manner of his defeat, and his manner was always to make someone pay. You refused the lesson. You looked at the same board I looked at, and you simply declined to pay the price everyone told you was fixed." He looked at the company in the dark, the living, the whole, the unbought. "There is no one to bury Miss Granger. Do you understand what you have done? I came to this graveyard braced, somewhere underneath, to lose someone because I have never once ended a chapter of this war without losing someone. And there is no one to bury. I do not think I have words for the size of that. I have been making war a long time, and I did not know it could be done like this." "It almost always can," said Hermione, and she found her voice had gone rough at last here in the dark where it was finally allowed to. "That's the part that's hard to live with, sir, once you've seen it. It almost always can be done with fewer dead than we accept. We just stop looking for the way because looking is exhausting and grief is familiar, and somewhere along the line we decide that a certain amount of dying is the cost of doing business." She looked at the scorched grass. "I had an unfair advantage. I'd already paid the bill the expensive way. All I did this time was read the receipt and refused to pay it twice." She walked the last few feet to the burned patch herself then and stood over it and let herself look at the place where Tom Riddle had finally and entirely stopped, and the strangest thing happened, the thing she had not planned for in any of her arithmetic, nothing. No triumph, no closure, no great cathartic release. Just the quiet and the cold and the absence of a weight she had carried so long she had forgotten it was a weight and not simply the shape of her own spine. She had spent 2 lifetimes leaning into a wind, and the wind had stopped, and for a moment she did not know how to stand. Then a hand found hers in the dark and held it and did not let go. "You're swaying," Harry said, low only to her, having crossed the graveyard without her noticing because he had spent a year learning to notice exactly the things she tried to hide. I've got you. Lean if you need to. You held the rope for me twice. I can hold it for you once. And Hermione, who had been the rope for everyone, who had crossed the ruin of a world holding the other end of everybody's hope, and never once let any of them feel the strain of it, landed, finally, in a dark graveyard with the war ended and every person she loved alive behind her, and let a 13-year-old boy hold her up for the length of one long breath, and did not feel weak for it because she had learned slowly across 2 lives that letting the people you have saved hold you in return is not the failure of strength but the whole point of it. Dobby brought her a conjured cup of tea from somewhere, because Dobby had decided that tea was the correct response to all of human experience, and the Aurors began the long, dull professional business of unmaking the wards and recording the scene, and Lupin and Sirius gathered the children toward the edge of the graveyard and the long way home, and the company that had walked into a killing ground walked back out of it whole, all of them, every one, into the ordinary dark of an ordinary night in the Midlands. Under a sky where, very faintly, the first stars of the returning moon were beginning to come back, the world rearranged itself around the news over the following weeks, as the world does, loudly and then ordinarily. The Daily Prophet ran headlines that made Sirius laugh his recovered laugh until he choked. The Ministry, in the person of a grimly satisfied Amelia Bones, confirmed what could be confirmed and stayed silent about what could not, and the official story credited a joint operation of the department and the headmaster, and gave a 12-year-old girl no name at all, which suited Hermione precisely, because the only people whose knowing she cared about already knew. The remaining servants, leaderless and suddenly without an immortal master to fear or follow, scattered or were rounded up. Lucius Malfoy, who had handed his master's soul to the enemy with his own gloved hand in a bookshop, spent a great deal of gold on lawyers and a great deal of dignity on staying out of Azkaban, and never did learn how close he had come to being the architect of his own lord's destruction. Tom Riddle, who had torn his soul into 7 pieces to escape a death he could not bear to look at, was as dead as it was possible for a person to be, all 7 pieces of him gone into the dark, and the long age of his shadow over Britain simply, quietly, ended. There was a gathering at the Burrow at the end of that August, because Molly Weasley had heard some garbled fraction of what her youngest son had been part of, and had responded the only way she knew how, which was to cook for 40 and summon everyone who mattered to a crooked house full of light. Hermione stood at the edge of the orchard in the gold of the evening and watched the saved world eat sausages off paper plates, and she let herself, for once, simply count. Fred and George Weasley were setting off small illegal fireworks behind the broom shed and blaming each other with identical innocent faces, 2 of them, both alive, both whole, neither one a name read aloud at a memorial. Molly was feeding Harry as though she meant to make up 11 years of it in a single sitting, and Harry, who had once curved an arm around a newspaper of chips so no one could take them, was letting her, and there was a looseness in his shoulders that had not been there a year ago and would never fully leave again. Sirius and Remus sat together on an upturned crate, 2 of the 4 marauders made whole, and a young witch with hair the color of bubblegum had pulled up a 3rd crate close to Remus and was making him laugh in a way that turned him briefly into someone lighter, the person he must have been before the war took everything. And Hermione watched the careful hope cross his ruined face and did not interfere, because some good things you simply let happen, and she had a private, particular stake in that one. Arthur Weasley had cornered her father about the workings of a rubber duck, and the 2 of them were the happiest men at the party. Dumbledore had come for an hour, an old man with a ruined hand and a paper plate, and had stood a little apart watching the noise with an expression Hermione had never seen on him in either life. The expression of a man who had spent a century arranging chess pieces and had finally been shown a board where nobody had to be sacrificed, and did not quite know what to do with his hands now that they were empty of other people's fates. "You did this," Harry said, coming to stand beside her at the orchard's edge, 2 plates of Molly's food in his hands, holding one out. "All of it, every person at this party. You know that, right? You don't just get to stand at the edge and watch it like it happened to someone else." "I'm not watching it like it happened to someone else," said Hermione, taking the plate. "I'm watching it like a person who knows exactly what it cost and exactly what the other version looked like, and is trying to hold both at once without dropping either. That's not standing apart, that's the opposite, that's standing closest." She looked out at the firelit orchard, at the impossible, ordinary, deafening aliveness of all of them. "In the world I remember, this house had empty chairs in it by the end. There was a clock on that wall with a hand for every Weasley, and one of the hands stopped. I've spent 18 months making sure that clock never loses a hand, and tonight I get to look at it and see all 9 pointing at home, and you'll forgive me if I need a minute to just look at the clock." Harry didn't say anything. He just moved a little closer, his shoulder against hers, and looked at the clock with her, because he had learned that the kindest thing you can do for a person carrying something enormous is not to lift it off them, but to stand under it too. Hermione did one private thing near the end of that summer that she told no one about, not even Harry. She took the exercise book out from behind the headboard in her room in Hampstead, the one with the cartoon owl on the cover, the one that had ridden back from the start of everything with her. She opened it to the first page, to the heading she had written in small, neat capitals on the morning she woke under the wrong ceiling, "What I Know." And she read the list beneath it, the list she had made herself write in full, first name and last, in the order they had fallen, because a name written in full is a person and she had refused to let them be casualties. She read them slowly, all of them, as you read names at a memorial, and then she went and found each one of them in her mind, in the world as it now was, and she let herself understand, name by name, what she had done. Cedric Diggory was alive, a tall, good-natured Hufflepuff 3 years above her who would now grow up and grow old and never once stand in a graveyard at the wrong end of a green light. Sirius was downstairs arguing with her father about cricket. Fred Weasley was alive, both of him, the twins indistinguishable and both breathing, and would make his joke shop and grow old beside his brother with the laugh never once going out of his face. Remus Lupin was alive and had a friend back in a future, and a young Auror named Tonks who had decided something at a war council and a sausage supper that Hermione had watched begin and would never interfere with. Mad-Eye, Ted Tonks, Colin, who was 9 years old this summer and would never sneak back into a battle because there would be no battle to sneak into. Dobby, who was at this moment in the Granger's kitchen teaching her mother an elf recipe and wearing 4 mismatched socks at once, alive, free, with a butter knife of his own and a whole long life of devotion ahead of him. She read the whole list of the dead in a sunny bedroom under a ceiling papered in cornflowers, and not one of them was dead. The memorial she had written forwards had become, every line of it, a roll call of the living. She had not been able to save everyone in the life she remembered. She had not saved anyone in the end in that life. She had only buried them and read their names and kept her voice from shaking. This time she had gotten there first, and the list of the people she had failed had quietly turned into the list of the people she had kept. And she sat on the floor of her childhood bedroom with the book open on her knees and finally, 18 months after she woke, let herself grieve the first war properly. All of it in great heaving silent sobs, because the dead of that other world deserved to be grieved by someone who remembered them, and because she was the only one left who did. And because it was finally safe to put the weight down. When it was done she dried her face and she took up her biro, and beneath the old heading "What I Know," beneath the list of names that were no longer a list of the dead, she wrote one last line and underlined it once, gently, with no force at all. "We won, and we kept them, all of them." Then she closed the book and put it away, not behind the headboard this time, but on the shelf with her other books in the open, where a finished thing belongs, and she went downstairs to her family. Years later, when she was old enough that the word had stopped being a battlefield and started being a life, Hermione would sometimes try to explain to people how it had felt, and find she couldn't quite. They knew the public version. Everyone knew the public version. They did not know about a salt cellar over a breakfast table, or a chip shop with a wobbling formica table, or a daisy chain set crooked over one ear, or a cake with candles that wouldn't stay lit on a pewter beach. They did not know that the whole of it, the saved world and the unfought war and the living roll call, had grown out of a single decision made by an 11-year-old lying very still under the wrong ceiling, refusing to move until she understood, and then understanding, and then choosing the door. Harry knew. Harry had eventually been told all of it, every page, the way she'd promised him on a train and again over ice cream, the whole impossible truth of where she'd come from and what she'd carried and why she'd appeared in his park one ordinary afternoon and decided he was worth coming back for. He had listened to the end of it without once letting go of her hand, and when she'd finished he had been quiet for a long time, and then he had said only, "So you loved me before I existed," in this version. "You loved me first," and she had said, "I loved you first," and that had been that, and it had never once frightened him, the size of it, because he had spent his whole second childhood learning that being loved that much was not a trap. They grew up. That was the miracle of it, the one she never stopped noticing. They simply grew up in a world with room in it to grow, the orphan who was meant to die in a forest and the girl who was meant to bury him, walking out the far side of a war that never came, and into all the ordinary years she had crossed the abyss to give him. There would be time later for the rest of it, for the thing that was already plainly between them to become whatever it was going to become in its own season when they were both old enough to choose it as she had chosen the door. There was no hurry. That was the whole point of what she'd won. There was, at last, for both of them, all the time in the world, but that came later. On the last evening of that long, strange summer, they were 13 and 12 and not in any hurry at all, sitting together on the bench in the Granger's garden where a broken man had mended, watching the light go gold and then gray over a world that had forgotten it was ever supposed to end. Sirius and Remus were inside losing an argument to her father. Dobby was singing to the begonias. Somewhere a blackbird was finishing its song. "Thank you," Harry said, "for finding me first." Hermione looked at him in the gathering dark, the friend she had saved from the start, alive and whole in hers, and she leaned her head against his shoulder, against something that would hold, and she watched the first star come out over the garden, and she was, for the first time in 2 long lives, completely and simply at peace. "Always," she said, "from the very beginning, every time, I'd find you first every single time." And the star steadied, and the blackbird sang, and the night came down soft and safe over a world she had reached back across the ruin of everything to save, one lonely child in a park at a time. Chapter 7 End.